This is Jocko Podcast number 88 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
I went into a public house to get a pint of beer. The publican he up and says, "We serve no redcoats here." The girls behind the bar, they laughed and giggled fit to die. I outsed into the streets again, and to myself says I, "Oh, it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy go away." But it's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play. When the band begins to play, my boys, the band begins to play. Oh, it's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play. I went into a theater as sober as could be. They gave a drunk civilian room, but they hadn't none for me. They sent me to the gallery or round the music halls. But when it comes to fighting, Lord, they shove me in the stalls. For it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy wait outside. But it's special train for Atkins when the trooper's on the tide. The troop ship's on the tide, my boys, the troop ship's on the tide. Oh, it's special train for Atkins when the trooper's on the tide. Yes, making Maka uniforms that guard you while you sleep is cheaper than them uniforms, and they're starvation cheap. And hustling drunken soldiers when they're going large a bit is 5 times better business than parading in full kit. Then it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy how's your soul? But it's thin red line of arrows when the drums begin to roll. The drums begin to roll, my boys, the drums begin to roll. Oh, it's thin red line of arrows when the drums begin to roll. We aren't no thin red arrows. No, we aren't no blackguards too, but single men in barracks most remarkable like you. And if sometimes our conduct isn't all your fancy paints, why single men in barracks don't grow into plaster saints. While it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy fall behind, but it's please walk in the front, sir, when there's trouble in the wind. When there's trouble in the wind, my boys, there's trouble in the wind. Oh, it's please walk to the front, sir, when there's trouble in the wind. You talk of better food for us and schools and fires and all. We'll rate for extra rations if you treat us rational. Don't mess about the cookroom slops, but prove it to our face. The widow's uniform is not the soldier's man's disgrace. For it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and chuck him out, the brute. But it's savior of his country when the guns begin to shoot. And it's Tommy this and Tommy that and anything you please. And Tommy ain't a bloomin' fool. You bet that Tommy sees. And that is another poem from Kipling. It's actually one of my favorites from Kipling. And you can follow it and you can go back and read through it, look it up online, and it's explaining how, you know, the soldier doesn't get any respect during peacetime. But when it's time to fight, when the troop ship is on the tide, then it's Tommy, which is slang for the British soldier, then it's Tommy to the front of the line. But the point that I wanted to focus on is a line in the poem where it says, and if sometimes our conduct isn't all your fancy paints, why single men in barracks don't grow into plaster saints. And what that means is that soldiers and Marines and sailors and those men that go out into harm's way voluntarily, they're not always Boy Scouts. They're not going to be plaster saints. You know, plaster saint, like you have the little statue of a saint, of a little Christian saint. The soldiers are going to be a little rough around the edges. They might be a little bit rowdy. They might be a little bit brash. They might be a little bit drunk. They might be troublemakers. Now, they're not all like that, obviously. But some of them are. And guess what? Who else is going to go forward?
Yeah.
Who else is going to go put their life on the line? It's these guys. And by the way, when you are raised in a barracks, a single man in a barracks, you're going to find some trouble from time to time. Mm-hmm. And then once you take these young men and you put them into battle, once you subject them to fear and terror and death, can we assume now and expect them to act like saints? Can we somehow expect that their behavior is now going to transition to becoming beyond reproach in the way they carry themselves? I don't think that's a realistic outlook. Now, the book that we're going to look at today is an example of war, and it shows once again that war is brutal. Not just in actions, but also in attitude, in language, and in the way it impacts men both physically and mentally. And this book is raw, it's graphic, it's brutish, and it's real. And the language that's in it that's offensive, I leave it in. Why? Because war is offensive. And the language used in war is also offensive. And if you don't want to hear offensive language or graphic descriptions or completely politically incorrect statements being made, then don't listen to this podcast. The book is called Excursion in Hell. And it tracks the experience of its author, a guy by the name of Vincent Bramley, who's a young corporal in 3rd Battalion of the British Army's Parachute Regiment, otherwise known as the Three Paras. Now, the book starts off kind of with the way the Falkland Islands is starting to escalate, and as it's starting to escalate, they get put on, they're in England, the Three Paras get put onto a cruise ship, a chartered cruise ship called the SS Canberra, and they're sailing south towards the Falkland Islands. And now they're starting to get information, they're starting to get intelligence and starting to get briefed on what's happening, because these guys didn't even know where the Falkland Islands were. I mean, a lot of them, they didn't know where they were. It's some random island out in the middle of nowhere. They couldn't find it on a map, a lot of them. Yeah. Well, now they're definitely looking at it, and they're trying to figure out what's going on there. So they're starting to get some of these briefs. We're going to the book now. Our lectures were in the early afternoon now. The most memorable was by some of the very keen Marines who had been serving in the Falklands at the time of the invasion. The Falkland Islands were in a British, I guess you'd call it a colony, but not a colony. It's a little British. It was owned by the British at the time.
Yeah.
And the Argentinians invaded it. So here we go. Obviously, listening to first-hand experience was better than listening to some officer lecturing us on his personal beliefs at the time. However, an intelligence officer from way up top gave a graphic account of what the RGs, that's what they call the Argentinians, the RGs, were up to at the time. The intelligence constantly coming in was essential to all levels. What I remember most about this lecture was the officer standing proudly in front of us saying the Argentine army is the best and strongest in South America. He told us, "You will be in for a big scrap if it comes to war, gents. Have no qualms about it." At the last recorded reports, the RGs have about 9,000 men in fortified positions around Stanley, the capital. But we also have good reports that they are underfed, morale is low, and they have taken to eating horses and sheep, which they have been stealing from the inhabitants. That's the local people that lived on the Falkland Islands. This tells us that they are very undisciplined and goes to show that conscription is going to be their mistake. So they have, some of their soldiers are conscripts, meaning they're forced into the army.
Oh yeah, like a draft kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. My immediate feelings were 9,000 fucking men, and we only have 2,000 or 3,000. What the fuck is the big brass up to? So what was interesting about this is, one of the things that this reminded me of is these guys have never been to war before. As a matter of fact, he doesn't even mention anyone that has any prior combat experience. Okay. And so this reminds me of when I was on all my first deployments. Like, I talked about being off the coast of Somalia. I talked about being off the coast of Rwanda. And that's the position that these guys were in. And what our mindset was, if I was to go into Rwanda when I was a kid, when I was, however old I was, 22 years old, never been in combat before, I would be a completely different person than if I went in right now. Yeah. With my, all the things that we talk about all the time. I mean, I just understand combat. I understand war better. I'm 45 years old. I've been in combat leadership positions, been in firefights. I understand these things. Yeah. My attitude would be completely different, almost completely different than it was when I was 22 or 23 years old, sitting there fired up with a million rounds. And, it's like Leif talking about, I remember, getting ready to go into Somalia or Rwanda. I had like hundreds of pounds of gear, grenades. We were so loaded out. We were too heavy. Yeah. Because we thought we were going to World War III. And that's what these guys are like. They've never been to combat. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think,
ready for everything.
Yeah, they're trying to be ready for everything, and just their attitude, and you can see it actually carries through. This thing is almost like, and this is what he says too, a lot of times it's almost like they're on this giant, really hard training exercise. Obviously, it turns very sour at some points and very much more beyond that. But this is what a lot of this reminds me of. These guys, now some of these guys had been in, I guess, the combat experience that these guys would have had, and I should have remembered this. I didn't. You know what these guys had combat experience? They had combat experience from being in Northern Ireland. So most of them had done deployments over into Northern Ireland. But I think that was a little bit more of a, it's not the full kind of combat they're about to get engaged in here. So that's what it reminds me of, hearing the way they're talking. All right, so back to the book. On 3 May, the submarine HMS Conqueror sank the Argentinian ship General Belgrano with a loss of about 300 lives. When this news was first brought to us, we were skeptical, thinking, yeah, okay. Once the news was official, it wasn't greeted with total enthusiasm. In the bar that night, most of us were solemn. We now knew war was inevitable. They have a bar it's a cruise ship that they're on. So they have a bar and they're drinking, and they get some allotment of beers in there. That's where they're hanging out. But all of a sudden, this is real. You don't kill 300, enemy sailors and think you're not going to go to war. Yeah. And it comes back to the book. The night of 4 May, while we were playing bingo in the bar, news came that the HMS Sheffield had been hit by an RG Exocet, which is a type of missile, and was sinking. The loss of a Harrier jet was also reported. The news hit the troops on board like a sledgehammer. Until now, everything we had heard had been in our favor. South Georgia had been retaken, and the RG's submarine patrol boats had all been hit. Even their inland positions had been bombed by the Navy, and now the Belgrano, which was the ship that they had sunk, sinking the Sheffield was the first of their strike backs. Morale in the bar that night swung from an incredible high to an almost sickening silence. And he talks about this, but the waiting. These guys are now, it's a long cruise down there. And I think it takes them about three weeks to get down.
Dang.
Back to the book. The day after the Sheffield was hit, we knew our wait was coming to an end. The atmosphere was quiet, and a morale booster was now much needed. The only thing possible for the task force was revenge. The sinking of the Sheffield had hit us as if we had lost a personal friend. Tension mounted, frustration showed in everyone's eyes. The fitness drills were now carried out in full kit, and pounding the decks in the heat was gutty work. So the whole time they've been steaming down there, they've been out there running laps on the deck of the cruise ship, trying to get in shape for what's coming. Back to the book. The main info we picked up suggested a possible move on 20 May. So they're trying to figure out what's going on. They're down. This guy's pretty low on the totem pole. They're trying to figure out what's going on. They're hearing all these different rumors, and now they picked up that maybe they're going to go on 20 May. Back to the book. Our nerves now started. The move south was steady and without any real complications. But further south we went, the further we were going in. Somehow, I and many others still didn't quite believe the war was going to happen. We were lost in our own thoughts on many different subjects. Home became secondary now. I thought about the ifs and whens of our arrival in the exclusion zone and of the landings and battles to follow. Home was not in my immediate thoughts. Survival was. Speculation was now rife as to what the landing procedure would be. We were still very much in the dark as to what was happening. But within the next 24 hours, all the bullshit, rumors, and personal beliefs were corrected by the platoon commander. "Gents," he said, "it's the green light." So they know they're now going in. And now they're getting into the serious preparations, packing and repacking. To make our webbing as comfortable as possible, we began to psych ourselves up for the days ahead. It was nerve-wracking beyond belief, yet morale seemed remarkably high throughout the ship, though the laughing and joking among the lads was partly to cover the fear. Not that anyone thought death was going to hit him. That was for the guy you were talking to. Again, the common belief, the common belief that we hear quite a bit, which is it's not going to happen to me.
Yeah.
And, I will say this as I say it for all these shows that we do. I'm skipping a bunch of stuff. I'm giving you some of the high points, but the way he lays this out and the tension that he builds, he does an outstanding job getting the tension and capturing it, and I'm going through it pretty quickly, but it's worth reading and I think it's worth reading because if you're in one of these situations, especially when you're in charge of guys that have never been to combat before, this is what you gotta. It gives you good lessons about keeping guys informed, about preparing them for combat, and keeping them with the right mindset going in. So now they actually transfer from the cruise ship. Now they get onto a warship, and eventually they end up on a landing craft that's heading to shore because they're going to war. Again, I covered that in 6 minutes right now. It's much more well detailed in the book, but right now they're getting ready to do their landing. Back to the book. The area now looked like an overcrowded tube train. The troops had pushed so close together that you could count the blackheads on your neighbor's face. I sat on my kit observing the order to keep all noise down, no talking. I looked around me at the hundreds of cammed faces. So they got camouflage paint on. At hundreds of cammed faces, all with big, wide eyes. Each face told its own story. Each soldier had his own thoughts about the coming battle. And as the lads quietly sat about waiting. Always waiting. The story of all soldiers. Myself, I couldn't help but think that it was still a joke. And that we wouldn't be going to shore. My stomach was in knots and the nausea was hard to control. The nervousness running through me was the worst of all. Waiting for that fucking green light. Doc Murdoch sat next to me, pulling faces like a comedian. "Fuck off, Doc," I said. "I've got the jitters." "We've all got to go somewhere, Vince. Don't worry." The frustration of waiting and all the hassles of the last 6 weeks disappeared as we watched in stunned silence the battle for Fanning Head to our left. Fanning Head was the RGOP near San Carlos. The SAS had mounted an attack there to allow our landings to go ahead without interference. The tracer rounds and naval bombardment on the tip of the bay brought us abruptly into the real world. Jesus, look at that. It's a fireworks display, shouted a lad at the front of the craft. Shut up and face the coming beach. We hadn't noticed we were moving towards the beach. All heads had been turned to watch the battle. So that's a little wake-up call. They're going in to do their beach landing, and there's a massive firefight going on where the SAS is doing a hit. Now, as they get on, they do their landing is unopposed, and they're starting to patrol movement towards one of their objectives. Here we go. When we passed San Carlos, 2 Gazelle helicopters had just been shot down by some of the fleeing enemy. Word very quickly went around that the crew had been shot in the water while trying to swim ashore. Our anger brought home the reality of war and introduced us to the type of enemy we would be fighting. I personally felt that if we could have caught those responsible, we would have killed them for the cowardly act. So there's some, well, cowardly acts, I guess is the word used. So the guys are trying to swim to safety and they get shot, the helicopter pilots. They get into a position and they hold up for a while in a security position. Back to the book. Guard sat behind the SF gun for 2 hours on, 4 off. There's no sleep to be had. What with the cold rain, ponchos flapping all over the place, and everyone restlessly changing positions all the time. It was a great first night. So they're out there, they're freezing. It's that's one thing they weren't really prepared for. They weren't really prepared for this cold weather. But that's how they kick off. No enemy contact yet, other than what they can see off in the distance. They get gathered up for a little morning meeting. Back to the book. Pete Gray gathered the NCOs around him for a daily brief and informed us of the things we weren't interested in, but also informed us that A Company and C Company had a blue-on-blue sometime earlier. Apparently, both companies had patrols out to look for the RGs who had escaped on our landing. One patrol had spotted the other and asked for mortars on their position seen. In turn, the other company asked for artillery on the first company. So a battle between A Company and C Company, both firing small arms at each other. Within minutes, the operations officer in charge realized the error and radioed for a ceasefire. But not before 3 to 4 lads had been badly shot up, 2 of them suffering head wounds. The ops officer was temporarily removed from the task. So, again, we got relatively unexperienced guys. They're out there, and again, obviously I highlight that because blue on blue is a real thing. And people don't think it's going to happen. I think Leif was talking about this. If you would have asked someone in TU Bruiser, he said, what are the chances that we're going to have a blue on blue on our deployment? People would have been like 0%. They would have said 0%. Because it's that taboo. Yeah. And the fact that, you know, there's a blue on blue that we talk about in extreme ownership, but there's blue on blues all the time in Ramadi. Yeah. And this is another example of how easy it is to have it happen between 2 companies in the same battalion. Back to the book. Well, lads, bad news, said Pete. The Atlantic Conveyor has been sunk. How the fuck did that get hit? Asked someone from the rear. You tell me. Pete wasn't a happy man, nor were we, for the ship had been carrying the Chinooks and luxury kit like tents, overboots, and so on. So there was a supply ship. Well, a ship that had a bunch of supplies on it, including helicopters. And helicopters is what's supposed to transport the paras around Falkland. That was the plan. That just got sunk. And not only did it get sunk with the helicopters on it, it got sunk with the things like tents and sleeping bags that's going to allow them to be, operate comfortably in this cold environment. If you don't know where Falkland Islands is, it's down by Antarctica. Back to the book. Some bastard should fall for this, we thought. All that kit on one bloody ship. Bad news of our choppers being sunk hit us sorely, and many of us were still thinking about it when Pete announced the next info. No choppers. So the big wigs have decided that we start walking ASAP, like today. Pete gave us a breakdown of what was happening. 2 para was on the march to Goose Green. 45 Commando were to head north to a settlement called Douglas. We, of 3 para, were to take Teal Inlet. Within an hour, all kit was packed tightly away, last meals and brews demolished, weapons oiled and ready, and bunkers evacuated. Brews. He's talking about tea. And the Brits, if you don't know, they like their tea. And it's epic. And I saw that, you know, with Brits that I've worked with. Obviously, I'm married to a Brit, so I know how much they like tea and drink tea. Mm-hmm. I saw it overseas. Guys would be they just would be ready to brew tea at any given time. The first people, the Sri Lankan, when I was working with the Sri Lankan guys back in the day, they've been heavily influenced by the British Army, and by the British culture, because that was a British settlement for a long time. They got their tea on too. They would brew you'd take a break for 10 minutes. These guys would be over there with a little stove, little hex lamp, brewing up a tea. Yeah. So that's something that you're gonna. And I'm talking about it now. I don't highlight it as much as I could in this podcast, but that's what they're talking about: having a cup of tea, brewing a cup of tea. Yeah, doing a brew. When I worked with guys, the SAS guys that would come and stay with us here, those guys were the same way. Get their brew tea on. Yeah, they gotta have a cup of tea.
Solid.
Back to the book. We made our way up the prominent part of Windy Gap where most of the battalion was gathering. The CSM, that's the Command Sergeant Major of B Company, was organizing which kit we were to carry and which to leave. No tripods for the SF guns, and the SF guns are sustained fire guns. It's basically a big heavy machine gun.
Yeah.
That takes a crew to operate. So you have a tripod, someone carries the tripod, someone carries the gun, someone carries the ammunition. At least I think that's how they break it up. No tripods for the SF guns and no sleeping bags. No Bergens. Bergens is what the Brits call their big backpacks or big rucksacks. All unnecessary weight to be left. We repacked our kit. The Bergens and tripods were centralized for a later pickup. They were to be choppered forward if a chopper became available. We all felt pissed off about the conveyor being sunk and the prospect of the coming tab. So they call a march or a hump, they call it a tab. Mm. We were pissed off about the coming tab. We knew that the march would be about 50 kilometers. Nice. But we were all glad to be moving, breaking out across the island on the offensive. We set out at about 2:30 in the afternoon on what was to be an epic march for the regiment. With the GPMG, that's a general purpose machine gun, webbing, order, and ammo slung over every part of our bodies, we tabbed, or rather hobbled, as fast as we could. Once over the first hill, we started to march around the side of an adjoining hill. At this time, the Marines were walking alongside us, ready to break northwards towards the Douglas settlement. Unlike us, they carried full kit, Bergens and all. Within 30 minutes, we had a short break to let the stragglers catch up. A young Marine was propped on his back beside me with his Bergen as a support. "You lot have the right idea," he said. "No fucking extras. We look like donkeys here." I couldn't help but agree with him, but thought to myself that while we may move faster, we'd be coldest at night. At that time, I didn't know we'd be marching flat out all the way, day and night. In less than an hour, our bodies were struggling under the weight of kit and ammo. The GPMG seemed to weigh a ton. We swapped it on every short break. Within the first 2 hours of the night march, orders were passed slowly back along the length of the battalion that we'd be stopping for 15 minutes in every hour. Some even started clock watching. Our boots and wet socks were becoming unbearable to march in, rubbing badly on the feet of most, if not all of us. Blisters and sprained ankles added unexpectedly to the injury toll. And I haven't done a good job of describing the terrain. It's miserable terrain. Just rocks, slippery rocks, big steep hills. It's go look at it go look at some images of what the terrain in the Falkland Islands is like.
Yeah.
It's nightmare to patrol on.
And it's the kind where it's snowing, kind?
It's gonna snow.
Yeah.
Not snowing yet, but it's gonna snow.
But it's that cold where it's like snow.
Which actually is in some ways worse. In some ways it's worse to have, because if it's cold enough that it's snowing, snow is generally dry. If that makes sense. Rain is rain, right?
Yeah.
You get rained on, you're wet.
Yeah.
If you get snowed on, you can maintain your dryness. So if you're in a really cold environment where it's snowing, that's okay. The snow, it doesn't make you wet, and wet makes you cold.
Yeah, it zaps. It
One of the
sucks
worst things is right on that borderline.
Yeah.
Between, because then you get rained on, but then when the sun goes down, it turns into freezing. So this is the worst environment you could want for this situation that they're in. And all their gear, they only have what limited gear they should have got sunk on a boat, or it's in their Bergens, but even the stuff that's in their Bergens isn't the best winter equipment they would want. All that stuff got sunk. So he's got a guy that's starting to slack a little bit. His name is Taff. Taff, move up, I screamed. I can't, Vince, I'm fucked. I was losing my rag. I could see he was out of it, but I couldn't stand the fact that he was going to let us down before we'd even got there. Taff was trying to keep up and mumbling out loud that he could do it if only we were to slow down a little bit. But this was impossible. Nobody could tell the lead elements to slow down. The gap got bigger. The swearing got louder. Taff wasn't the only one to feel the strain. Many of the lads were struggling. At last, exhausted, we stopped on the slope of yet another wind-swept hill. Taft shook uncontrollably. He had a bad cramp and lay there, totally out of the game. I informed the medics. Steve was sitting beside as usual when the unusual order came from the CO, the commanding officer. Brew up a hot cuppa and make a snack. That was the order. This shocked a lot of us. Theoretically, it was a no-no sitting in the middle of an advance in the open and pitch dark. Practically, though, it was the best order yet. A welcome brew was what we needed. The CO was obviously aware that the lads were suffering from the speed of the march. To me, Taft looked as though he was about to die. His 9-stone frame wasn't strong enough for the rest of the march. Taft could run the Army's British fitness test in around 8 minutes and was considered our best runner. This proves, as do other accounts I heard after the war, that the fitness of troops cannot be determined by how fast they can run. The Paras always pride themselves on tabbing with kit, so that means marching with gear, and rightly so. But I learned a lesson on our first night's march. You must have body fat on you to waste for that kind of long tab that we had embarked on. So got a guy that's like, super thin triathlete. Now you put a bunch of weight on him. He's hurting. And I'll tell you that was also, that's a generalization too. That's not always true. I know some guys that were lean and could run fast, and they could also hump a ruck like it was their business. Now they start gathering up kind of the guys that can't continue. And they actually leave these guys that can't continue in a perimeter area. And then we're going back to the book. We slogged it out for another 2 or 3 hours of continuous hills, bogs, rocks, holes in the ground, everything that could possibly make you trip or get wet. On top of the bloody awful terrain, we had the rain, sleet, wind, and freezing climate to cope with. Exhausted and nearer the point of collapse, we came to the first man-made thing I'd seen, apart from the small houses at San Carlos. It was a barbed wire fence. There, right in the middle of nowhere, sat the fence, stretching far into the darkness on either side. Orders from above told us to rest up until first light. We had been marching for 15 hours across the worst terrain you could imagine. Steve and I attached our ponchos with bungees to the fence, and Skitty, Kev, and Johnny bashed up on the other side, creating a tent-like accommodation. That's like their term for making shelter. Yeah. We'd call it bivvy up, which is that's where we're going to sleep. They call it bashed up. We'd say bivvy up. Hey, we're going to bivvy up here. It rained hard for the remaining 4 hours of darkness. The wind blew the rain in on us as we all lay there trying to rest in the basher. But although we were exhausted, someone snoring soon broke into my thoughts, and outside around the basher little whispers could be heard and other voices shouting for silence. I closed my eyes, dreaming of a bath, clean sheets, and a letter from home. I didn't mind the rain as it hit my face. The chance to rest was welcome, and I eventually managed to sleep. I was awoken by a nudge from Skitty, who was already half-packed and ready to move. Steve and I crawled from our refuge and quietly packed our kit into our webbing. The rain and cold had shrunk the webbing so that it was difficult to fasten. Cold and numbness had us swearing out loud. We tabbed over more hills, through more bogs and marshes. My legs ached more than I had thought possible. Steve was, if anything, better than me with the weight. Every time I started to struggle with the GPMG, he took it without complaining. Carry that weapon he could. So, brutal march. They get to their next destination where they're going into a layup point or a perimeter where they're going to stop for a while. Back to the book. My stomach felt hollow. The wind and rain drained me of life. Lying there, feeling near to total exhaustion, I couldn't even think of what was to come. The battle for Teal Inlet. My feet didn't exist anymore. They were just 2 blocks of numbed ice attached to my legs. Tapping them together brought a pain that felt as if they would shatter and fall off. Steve lay next to me, lighting up a fag, which is a cigarette. He looked up through the rain clouds at the darkened sky. If we carry on at this rate, we'll all drop dead of exhaustion, he murmured. Steve said that he didn't want to look at his feet because they felt like they were falling off. I peeled back my wet socks, saw blood on my right foot, and discovered that the nail of my big toe was hanging off. Numbness had masked what normally would have been agony. Clenching my teeth, I pulled the nail away by its remaining roots. Soon, the shout went out that we were to get ready to move. We were moving earlier than expected to catch the last of the daylight. When I stood up, my body ached from head to foot. I was minus 1 toenail. I took up my kit and moved into line with the others, ready to go the last 13 kilometers to Teal. So far, it had taken us about 14 hours to march 40-odd kilometers. That was still good going. We set off very slowly, spaced out in one long line. We hobbled over the hill in front of us, only to see more hills and marshes. I began to become conscious of my toe, and the more I thought about it, the worse it felt. However, the thought of dropping out at that stage seemed a fate worse than death, and so I fought the pain. It's funny, looking back, but the further we went into the campaign, the less I thought of my home or family. I wasn't thinking of Queen and country either. I thought of myself and the lads around me. Letting the side down was my biggest fear. That fear kept me walking. Just doesn't want to let his boys down. Yeah. That's his driving force. Not even thinking about his family anymore. Not thinking about God and country. Not thinking about the Queen. Here's a little thing that I had to highlight. We were annoyed by the lack of info coming down the marching line to tell us where we were and how far we had left to march. This is as a lesson I learned a long time ago when I was a young junior guy in a platoon. And if you're in the back of the platoon or you're in the back of the patrol and you don't know where you're going, it is the worst feeling. It's the worst feeling. You have no idea how much longer, where you're going, where you are. Not only is it a bad feeling for the people on your team, it's tactically unsound because they don't know where they are. Yeah. So what happens if you get contacted? You get split up. Where are they supposed to go? They don't even know where they are. Yeah. What if they go in the wrong directions? They could go into enemy formation. It's a horrible scenario. And obviously, as a leader in any position, you got to think: does the back of your patrol know where you are?
Yeah.
Does your company know where you are? I was working with a company recently. They had a big transition to make, but no one knew what quantified that transition. It just seemed like this open-ended prospect, and no one knew where it ended or what quantified. Hey, okay, we can move to the next phase. So it was a tough phase that they were going through. Cutting costs and being restrictive on expenditures. I guess that is cutting costs, but getting rid of some people is a tough time.
Yeah.
But no one knew when that was going to end.
Right.
They just thought they knew that there was some kind of goal out there, but they didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And that was really tough for them in the transition. So I said, you need to set clear goals. If you know what they are, which actually the leadership did know, they knew there was a certain line, a certain amount of cost that they needed to cut, a certain operating expense that they needed to get down to. But they didn't tell anybody. So everyone just thought, well, we might just be cutting my job next, or how long am I going to be here? Maybe we're just shutting down. I don't know.
Yeah.
So keep your people informed. The people that are in the back end of your patrol, you got to keep them informed. Back to the book. We came to a fourth river, smaller than the rest, and stumbled across it in the dark. The cold water mixed with our sweat to cause yet more sores on our feet. We were now about 1.5 kilometers from the settlement of Teal Inlet. The agony of the marching disappeared quickly as it became clear that the task of the battle would soon confront us. And how does that go? 1.5 hours of lying in the cold with the winds shooting through us was all the action they had that night. So they get to Teal Inlet and really nothing really happens because the RGs had left. They do get some updates. Back to the book, we found out that some of the platoon had dropped out on the march. More importantly, though, Mick Coleman, one of our gunners, had just been shot in the leg. Not by the enemy, but by a knob in A Company. So their first, casualty, besides someone getting hurt from marching, is somebody that gets shot by one of their own people.
What's a knob?
Just a derogatory term for a tool.
Right, a knob.
A turd.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right. It's not a military term.
Right, it's not official.
It's not official military doctrinal term. Knob. Just saying a turd. The CO and his back to the book. The CO and his band of followers inspected the lines later that morning. So now they're dug in another position. We thought they might instruct us to move our trench or something. The usual thing. But we were still thinking as though we were on exercise. So, classic point right there. The commanding officer comes around and they think, he's going to tell us to redig these trenches because that's what we'd be doing if we were on exercise. Hey, you need to move this over here. That could be a little bit better. He doesn't do any of that. The CO looked grim as he approached the 6 of us taking a tea break. Listen in, lads, said the RSM. That's the regimental sergeant major. We looked at him, wondering what was coming. During the march, 2 para, so that's their sister battalion, 2 para attacked Goose Green and Darwin settlements. After a long battle, the regiment liberated the settlement with a loss of 18 lives, including their commanding officer, Colonel H. Jones. Many have been wounded, and a casualty list is being drawn up. They captured hundreds of RGs. The war is now a different concept, for the enemy are believed to have shot down members of 2 para showing a white flag. More information will be given once known. The CO half smiled and proceeded to the next line of partly dug trenches. Skiddy, Kev, John, and I looked at each other with open mouths. The thought of 18 members of 2 para dead outweighed the victory for us. I, for one, couldn't have given a shit about Goose Green or anywhere else on the island at that time. It was the thought of losing our mates in the sister battalion that worried me. So they think they've got it bad, but this other battalion had been in a serious gunfight and taken some pretty significant casualties, including losing their leader, the leader of the battalion. Back to the book. The condition of our feet was becoming a major problem for the battalion. An old complaint suffered by troops during many wars was afflicting us in modern war. Trench foot. Our boots, badly and cheaply made, coupled with our old-fashioned socks and puttees, caused this condition. And puttees are like, I don't know if you've ever seen those old kind of school World War I. They're like leggings or like gaiters. You know what gaiters are? They kind of cover your shoes. They kind of cover your boots. It was this trench foot. It was characterized by a dull, thumping ache all over the foot with blueness at the edges. Some say it's similar to frostbite, which some lads also got. Now they hold up for the night, and then as he's sleeping, we get this Corporal B. Corporal B. That's who we're talking about right now. That's Vince Bramley. They call him Corporal B a bunch. Corporal B, a voice whispered into the trench. Steve and I came around together. I looked up to see 4 platoon's officer looking down at me. Yes, sir, I replied. Vince, isn't it? Yes, sir. Being asked your first name wasn't unusual between officers and men in the field. Sorry, old boy, bad news for you. In my half-sleep, I couldn't think of anything worse than being woken up. Orders from the boss. We're pulling out at first light and marching to Estancia, he said. Estancia? Where the fuck is that, I asked. It was another 30 to 50 kilometers away, towards Stanley, we learned. Stanley, again, is the capital. Steve and I looked at each other as we sat in the bottom of our trench, too numb to speak. I broke the silence first. This is getting fucking stupid, Steve. March here, dig there. We're dropping down like flies, and now more. Do or die marching without resting. Steve started laughing at my moaning, his teeth shining in the dark. What are you so happy about, I said. Just thought of more pain for the cause. Pain. Jesus, he was right. My feet would die before me, I thought. As I drifted back to sleep, I thought of my old corporal who trained me, Corporal Deering. We hated him for his hard methods. He used to say, pain doesn't matter, the mind does the work. He was right, so right. His voice was screaming in my ears now, 4 years later. It was going to be mind over matter. There is wisdom in the para's training methods. I thought briefly of my parents, who over the years had a rough time with my slobbish attitude. I had been in and out of all sorts of trouble before joining the army. I said to myself that if I died with a bullet in the head, at least it would be better than worrying them into an early grave with my attitude. But to drop out now and be branded a wanker would be unbearable. I owed a lot to everyone, my old NCO, my parents, and above all, to the lads around me. A para team cannot work without everyone giving their best. It's the lads you fight and work for. You come second. So, obviously, more patrolling, more boots over the Falkland Islands, another 30 kilometers up and down crappy terrain. Back to the book. We are now within the enemy's artillery range. The CO has ordered that we will dig shell scraps for protection. No movement like walking around, etc., until ordered tomorrow. So now they're within enemy artillery range, which we don't like artillery around here. Not when it's coming towards us, at least. They're taking a look at each other, seeing where they're at. Steve and Tomo looked at my feet, wondering if I would be able to carry on. I found a bandage hidden in my webbing and cut it up to make small dressings for my blisters and toes. I thought the fresh air would do them help. Leaving my boots off that night was to be my worst mistake so far. After a freezing cold and sleepless night, the morning light showed me 2 swollen feet and the hardest frozen pair of boots imaginable. Putting those boots back on was agony. We marched for about 4 hours until the whole battalion had rendezvoused. By the time we reached this point, I was nearly crying in pain. My hips had bad webbing burns, and my feet were two raw blobs. As I slumped against a peat bank, Jimmy Morum murmured that I looked like death warmed up. I felt like it too. Within 2 weeks, we looked like a rag and bone army. Our faces were drawn with the loss of weight, our uniforms matted and soaked, our boots were damaged, and we were hungry for solid food. Despite all this, morale was very high in the reassuring knowledge that we had marched and taken most of the island without a battle or a loss of life so far. So they're making rapid progress. And they're not really coming up against any enemy. The enemy's retreating. Every time they roll into a place, they find remnants of where the enemy was, or they have intelligence that the enemy was there, but the enemy's just leaving. So it's just them against nature. Yeah. That's where it's been for the most part at this point. They keep humping. We shuffled together and we were informed that we would be marching straight onto Mount Longdon that night. The battle was about to begin. So this is a prominent piece of terrain called Mount Longdon. We had no time for last letters or anything else. We packed our kit and were briefed and ready to go within 2 hours. The battalion formed up and marched uphill again, spilling out of the settlement towards the summit of Estancia. The route we took was atrocious. We crossed a rock field of some sort. The rocks were sharp and jagged. In 4 hours, we only covered 3 kilometers. Sweat ran down us like water. I stopped at one stage to take off my soaking long johns. We came to halt as the order, turn back, hit our ears. What's the fucking matter now? Someone shouted. Just turn back and do as you're told, screamed an officer. Just on the other side of the hill, out of the view of Stanley, which is the capital, the lads had been ordered back. Why? Shortly after, we learned that the cabbage heads, so they call, that's the Marines, and there's Marines, Royal Marines are down there working and running some of the major operations, and they call them cabbage heads. Shortly after, we learned that the cabbage heads running the show hadn't agreed to our advance. They didn't think we should take the risk of going into battle on our own. So the Marines wanted to be there with them. So they said, "Oh, don't go to Longdon yet." Back to the book. As we were milling around a peat fire with 9 Squadron, a chopper came down from one of the mountains. Some nosy lads ran towards it and quickly brought back a report that some Marines had been in a blue-on-blue contact that night. So another blue-on-blue. A returning patrol had stumbled upon a mortar-based team asleep and had shot them as they lay in their sleeping bags. There were 3 to 4 dead. Whatever we felt about the Marines, we were sorry for them on that day. If you're out there and you use a gun for part of your job, whether you're in the police department, whether you're in a SWAT team, whether you're in the military, I'm telling you, the blue on blue happens. And you got to do all you can to train for situations and always be aware that it can happen. People don't think it can happen. That's why it happens. Back to the book. On 10 June, we had orders that something was going down soon. We stripped our weapons thoroughly, oiled and greased them. The PC issued 50 rounds per gun for balancing. That's like basically test firing and probably doing some kind of a timing drill on your weapon to make sure that it's good to go. Bob Geddes immediately balanced his gun by firing across the water inlet into the sea. Tony Jones was just setting up his when the QM, that's a quartermaster guy in charge of supplies and logistics, came screaming over and ordered us not to waste ammo. We pointed out that the guns needed balancing, but his narrow mind wouldn't have it. He walked away pleased by the thought of saving ammo. In fact, he caused a major fuck-up with all the guns in the battle. Only 2 of the 6 worked. 50 rounds through each might have saved lives and would have at least provided better firepower for the battalion. So you got a guy... The supply guy, hey, don't test fire your weapons. Don't do that right now. Save the ammunition. Now, they did realize that they were going to have an ammunition shortage. That was going to be a problem. But you're not going to have an ammunition shortage if your guns don't work. Back to the book. The PC came down, and we gathered round him eagerly. He stood faintly, grinning at us. "Spit it out, sir," said Johnny Cook. Orders in a half an hour. Tonight, lads. Green light. See you by the model in a half an hour. So, the model, he's talking about, they built a little, terrain model so that they could kind of draw out where everyone's going, kind of go through the plan. And this is what they're talking about now, is the assault on Mount Longdon, which is about to begin. Begins with getting into position, and finally they are in position. The assault is getting started. Things start going sideways pretty damn quickly. Back to the book. Lieutenant Oliver rushed over to our position. Right, listen in, he said. I felt like saying I was anyway, but for the time, joking was over. B Company have had to change their tactics a bit. Corporals Bramley's and Cook's teams will follow myself and Captain Mason into A Company positions, while Corporal Tomo, Rawlings, and Pierce will go to another task. Okay? So things are going crazy. They start to move. He starts to move with Lieutenant Oliver towards this other position. Back to the book. We'd run about 200 meters. We were all still together, but now the run had become a fast, stumbling walk. The noise of battle continued to grow, continued to our right now as we moved around the slope. Suddenly a zipping sound whipped across my face. I didn't think anything of it as I walked and stumbled to keep up. Then 3 or 4 more zips hit the ground in front and at my feet. I still carried on. I was walking behind Lieutenant Oliver. As I was walking behind Lieutenant Oliver, we saw bodies lying all over the place. I thought, what the fuck are they doing lying there? Jesus Christ, fucking lying there, and we're struggling? I saw a lad kneeling over a guy in a sleeping bag. I remember as I got to them, just watching him. A low moaning was coming from the sleeping bag. I'd gone about 20 paces when several more zips hit the ground, sending a small shockwave all around me. For fuck's sake, are you completely nuts or what? Some guy shouted. What? Asked Lieutenant Oliver. Do you know a sniper's picking at us? We stopped, frozen solid in our tracks, then fell to the ground. Our small column now joining the bodies lying all over the place. We had walked into A Company's form-up, where they had been stopped by a sniper. Lying there, it hit me like a sledgehammer. The zips that had been missing me by inches, they were sniper fire. I lay there thinking, you fucking idiot, Vince. I cursed myself all the time we lay there, blaming myself for an unprofessional act. But then I'd never been shot at before, and my mind had been so occupied with moving that the zipping sound seemed unconnected with the battle. So, like I said, first time being shot at, and he didn't know what it was. And I've told this story on here before, but the first time I got shot at, or the first time I was receiving fire, was in Humvees. And I thought someone was throwing cigarettes out onto the road. And I was like, who the hell is smoking in that Humvee ahead of me? But it was rounds hitting the Humvee.
It's crazy.
So, and I was the same way. I was just like, it didn't occur to me.
Yeah. When it hits you that they're bullets, are you like in shock, or do you just kind of shift into,
I shifted into game time, but it took me it was a pretty slow transition. It took me to think through the whole process of who's smoking a cigarette. Wait, why are they throwing cigarettes? Wait, why do they have so many cigarettes? Is the entire Humvee smoking a cigarette and putting them all out right now? And it wasn't like a massive volume of fire, but it was rounds hitting.
Well, it can be one.
Yeah, that's the.
Wait, so you saw it on another Humvee in front of you?
Yeah, the Humvee in front of me.
You saw the sparks.
I saw the sparks coming off of it, and I thought, someone
throwing cigarettes.
Yeah, why is someone throwing a cigarette out?
Holy cow!
Same thing. I will say this though: the first time I got shot at when I wasn't in a vehicle, I heard the rounds going over, and I knew what it was because I was used to it from when we do butts. I don't know how else to explain it. When you shoot on a range, like when you go sight in your rifle, you shoot on the range, and some of us guys, you go down and you work the targets for the other guys. So you're basically in a bunker kind of.
Oh, okay.
Or you're behind a big berm.
Yeah.
And you put the target up for your guys.
Gotcha.
And then when they shoot at it, you pull it back down, you mark it with these discs so that they know where their shots hit so they can make adjustments, then you put it back up again. So when you're doing that, and you do it at different distances, they shoot from different distances. They shoot from 100 yards, and they shoot from 300 yards, and they shoot from 500 yards, and they shoot from 800 yards. So you can just hear all these different ones. And the further out they get, the more you hear the actual sound of the round going over you.
Right.
And at certain ranges, you can hear it breaking the sound barrier, and it's pretty loud. It's a crack. More,
yeah.
But then when they get far enough away, you don't hear that anymore, and it just sounds like he's talking about, like a little zip, like a little, you know. It's a. But I knew what it was. The first time I ever got shot at, I knew exactly what it was.
Yeah. It's crazy.
I knew what was. Well, that's the first time I got shot at, not in a Humvee.
Right, not in the Humvee.
Which, by the way, I got shot at first. That was the first time I ever got shot at. Was in the Humvee.
Yeah.
All right, going back to the book. The battle was raging on the hill. Artillery shells were landing there, adding to the ricochet of bullets. If you slowly raised your head, you could watch the free firework display, because that's what it looked like. The odd shout could be heard, and the odd scream, but it was the sound of rifle, machine gun, and artillery that dominated the night. So we've gone from, hey, we're out on patrol and we're looking, now there's a full battle going on. After about an hour, we were all getting pissed off with this fucking sniper. Something had to be done, and quick. He was holding up 130 men. So these guys are pinned down. They're pinned down. And the idea was, finally the plan that they come up with is they're going to use a Milan, called a Milan. It's like a short range kind of, it's like a bazooka, but it's wire guided, so you can actually steer it a little bit. It's a missile, a little hand carried missile. And that's the plan, is to use that to shoot from where they think this sniper is shooting from. So they get in position, they get the Milan in position, and then they're going to, once they shoot with the Milan, they're going to shoot their machine guns at it. Stand by, shouted Captain Mason. My feet were forgotten, my mind emptied of any thoughts, but my eyes were completely alive, staring at the area of the fin. He's talking about this terrain feature that looked like a shark fin, and possible target. Fire! Ginge let off the Milan. The rocket whooshed off the small portable frame and picked up its deadly speed. After 120 meters, it was at its deadliest. We were only about 90 meters from the target. By the way, if you're a sniper shooting at you from 90 meters, that is scary. He's not missing. Ginge managed to guide the wire guide the missile on target. The explosion ripped into the night, sending sparks everywhere. Bob pressed the trigger and our gun burst to life for a few seconds, then stopped. Stoppage, screamed Bob. I tried to lift the cover off the top of the GPMG, but the night sight was in the way. I ripped off the night sight from the weapon and threw it into Sass's hands. It's another guy, Sass. I cleared the gun and reloaded. Bob was just about to fire again when a zipping sound ripped into the ground right in front of our tripod. We both ducked behind the bank. The enemy's bullets whizzed over our heads and all around us. Ginge was laughing and shouted, "They've seen you all right. Fucking brilliant, isn't it? My night and the bloody guns packed up." Captain Mason shouted over from behind us, "Reload, reload. CS9 wants another one up there." So they want him to hit it again, hit that sniper position again with the Milan, which they do. And they eventually take care of that problem and are able to move on. Now they start coming back down from that supporting position, because that's what they're doing. Is the most part they're assigned into supporting positions to get the high ground and support the assault as they're happening. They come back down from that. We reach the bottom of the hill at about 0030 hours. The battle had been going for some 3.5 hours. We came up to the FAP, that's their first aid post, and walked past a line of guys lying there moaning in half silence. The medics were busy with all the wounded. There seemed to be about 25 guys working and wounded in the group. We were sitting some 20 meters from them in the darkness, and we could only just see the scene by the light of the moon. A sergeant from Battalion HQ came over to us, and Lieutenant Oliver and Captain Mason stood up to meet him. "We have 3 confirmed dead at this moment," he said. "Murdoch, Scott, and Greenwood. We know there are more, but we can't get to them as yet." So Murdoch, if you remember the guy that was making funny faces when they were on the boat coming in, confirmed dead. Their conversation continued around our coming task and that the RSM was coming to meet us. I sat in a trance. I couldn't believe that we had lost guys. Today it seems crazy that I should think like this. Why? I can only put it down to the fact that I was still in my own little world of make-believe. We would win the war without getting anyone killed. The death of those 3 guys hit me like a brick. Total shock. Murdoch, or simply Doc. Doc, who I'd been chatting with on the way to our start line after we bumped into B Company, now dead. Scotty from the MT platoon, that's the motor transport platoon, like Greenwood, recently nicknamed Fester because of his sleeping habits. My mind was blank to the conversation around me. Johnny nudged me. "Vince, we're moving, mate." This woke me to the reality of it all. I was now fully alert, for surely there was more to come. So now they're getting to another, like I said, their job has been doing supporting arms, which is basically cover and move on a big scale. That's what they're doing. You've got a group, this machine gun platoon with the Milan, with the heavy machine guns. They're getting into elevated positions to cover for another element, another company, or another battalion to go in and assault a target. This is classic cover and move situation, and they're in the cover position in most of these situations. And that's what's going on where we come back to the book. They're in another elevated firing position. Back to the book. Corporal B, get ready. I waited for the command sergeant major to give the orders to fire. The wait was longer than I expected, and my fingers stayed on the trigger, frozen, waiting. As I sat waiting for the command, other voices came to my ears from among the sounds of battle. The voices of the wounded. Everywhere, their cries pitched in with those survivors still struggling and screaming frantically at each other to move there or move here. But the wounded were unlike anything else. Their cries could be heard above the uninjured. Their shouts were desperate. My mind went blank. My eyes were wide open with fright for them. My mouth dried as I lay there. The seconds seemed like hours. Their anguished moaning and crying is here in my ears now as I write. No matter what I or others did to try and ignore them, they somehow seemed to grow louder and louder. I burned with frustration. One victim, who I later found out was Baz Barrett, seemed so near, groaning and shouting, "Help me, please, don't leave me, for fuck's sake, help, I can't move." Someone further along to our left called out, "For Christ's sake, I'm dying. Don't let them bury me here. Please, please." I shouted out, "Hang on, don't move, for fuck's sake, keep quiet." I started to crawl from my position. I wanted to help them. The platoon commander grabbed my arm. "Leave it, Corporal B. Leave it." I looked at him. "Why?" "Because a sniper has already picked off about 5 or 6 guys that have tried to help. The top says no more, okay?" I slumped to the ground with a feeling of total helplessness. It was the worst feeling that anyone can imagine. As I tried not to think it was real, the cries continued. "Oh God, I'm hit in the chest. I'm all wet. Please help." The crying went on and on. Some wounded guys had been dragged or had crawled away from the main impact area only to be pinned down elsewhere. My mind seethed with anger. "Corporal B, stand by!" the CSM screamed. The command to follow killed off all the cries and moaning. The weapon broke a stream of fire at the Argentinian positions, 3 to 5 rounds bursting across the summit. The steady rate of fire continued as the CSM shouted across to change direction using our tracer rounds as indicators. All 6 guns opened up. Our tracers ripped across the summit to the other end of the mountain, the bullets bouncing and ricocheting in all directions. So, hammering the target, they're hammering the enemy from where the enemy is shooting, and obviously, I mean, what a wretched description of being within the sound of the voices of your wounded men who you cannot help because they're pinned down by snipers. Eventually, they This goes on for a long time. They're in this supporting position. They're laying down fire. They're shooting thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds. Back to the book. The CSM shouted, "Stop, stop." Worn out, we rested our heads on the ground. The battle had now been going on for some 11 hours. How long we had lain there firing, I did not know. The CSM came over. "Well done. A company are moving through to our left now. We've covered them and given them all the help we could give. The rest is up to them. We can't fire anymore. It'd get to them. It's too close now. It'll be light in an hour or so. Pull the gun back and dismount it." "Sir, did we get any?" asked Bob. "More than enough," he replied, and walked away. Had we killed? We must have. I felt nothing afterwards, just relaxed. I hadn't seen our targets. They had been hidden in darkness. We hadn't killed at the end of a bayonet or through a rifle sight. We had killed with a spray of machine gun bullets. It didn't seem personal. It was as if the enemy hadn't existed at all. They complete that mission, and then, yes, they crawl back to a little bit of a covered position away from where they had been supporting. And then here we go, back to the book. About 70 meters away, the ground exploded in a mass of earth, shrapnel, and rock. Then another shell came over, this time further to our right. I looked down the hill as the shell exploded and saw an unbelievable display of flying red sparks, deadly shrapnel. The ground shook as shell after shell fell behind us. The first minutes of shelling were terrifying. So this is it. Now they started, we mentioned that they were on artillery range, and we all know what an absolute horror show artillery is. Back to the book. In the distance, a booming sound began that carried over the area. Someone screamed, "Incoming, incoming." Sure enough, the air disappeared. There was a whoosh, and the explosion killed any remaining piece. The shells came in thick and fast. I lay watching the red, glowing shrapnel flying by. Now the shrapnel was creeping up towards me, the explosions getting so loud I thought they would deafen me. The shells were landing about 50 meters away. 4 or 5 shells would hit an area in a salvo. Then the next batch would hit about 10 meters nearer. The booming from Stanley could still be heard in the gaps between explosions in our areas. As I lay there watching the shrapnel getting closer, I found myself shaking. Was it from cold or fright? My legs shook and I couldn't control them at all. The next salvo landed 30 meters away. I curled up into a ball as the shrapnel splintered the rocks around me. A piece of shrapnel landed in my little alcove, still burning with fury, sizzling into the dirt by my waist. 4 or 5 more shells landed around us, and then it stopped, as if it had never begun. The air was misty, as though a fog had swept over us. I lay back, praying it was over. In the half-light of the false dawn, I could now hear shouting all down the hill. Some guys were screaming like mad. One voice went right through me, the scream of a man who knows he's about to die. All over the hill, people were shouting, "Medic! Medic!" I was about to crawl from my hole when another shell hit the ground. I hadn't even heard it coming. I fell on my face and stayed there for a few seconds. Another shell landed nearby. This time a shower of dirt fell on my back. I crawled back into my hole and curled up again, waiting. My body shook uncontrollably. The shells landed in thick salvos, the noise and explosions around me making my head spin as if someone were banging it against a wall. I willed it to stop, but the shells carried on, landing around me. Then this second bombardment, within minutes, ended as suddenly as it had begun. So horrible situation that they're in. And much like we talked about the Germans having their mortars dialed in and their artillery dialed in, it's the same thing. You're in the Falkland Islands. There's obvious terrain features. So when you're holding a city, like the Argentinians military is in the city of Stanley, well, they know where they're going to get attacked from, and they know what are good firing positions, so they have those positions dialed into their artillery. And they can just start hammering them. Back to the book. I can remember the OC shouting behind me, "Move, move, their artillery will be here soon again." So now they're trying to move. Sergeant P waited only for me to squeeze myself through the gap before he took off again. After we had gone about 4 or 5 steps, a hand dropped out of the rocks, grabbing at my ankle and denims. The shock of it made us jump. Instantly, Sergeant P was back with me. We both looked at my feet. Still holding my denims was a wounded Argy. His eyes were staring at me, pleading, perhaps full of sorrow. Sergeant P shouted, Step back, Brammers." I tried to step back, but the wounded soldier tightened his grip on me. I leaned back as Sergeant P pointed his weapon and fired 2 bullets into the man's head, the noise of his weapon echoing around the small gap. Tomo and Johnny were behind me now. The Argy's head bounced quickly as the 2 rounds entered him. His eyes rolled to the back of his head, and his mouth opened to release a trickle of blood and saliva, which ran down his chin onto his shirt collar. At the same time, his hand gave up its grasp on my denims and dropped onto my boot. I flicked my boot as if I was playing football. His hand and arm dropped across his body, and from his mouth came a low whistle of air mixed with blood. All this took seconds, but it seemed like a lifetime to me. Each detail remains with me today. The sight of this guy dying at my feet shocked me, but I was growing harder. Although shaken, I felt no remorse at the time. The deadly game of war lay at my feet. Only I mattered. The rights and wrongs of war can never be argued from the armchair. Decisions are made on the spot, questions asked afterwards. That lone RG could have been rigged to a booby trap, or even armed. The kill was done quickly and professionally. I felt that I should have acted as quickly as Sergeant P. "Come on, move," he shouted. Sergeant P screamed an order for me to follow him. As we trotted further into the clearing, we had to jump over the twisted pile of corpses. My mind was never, nor has since been, so alert. Adrenaline was rushing through my body so quickly that I felt I was floating with excitement mingled with fear. A little further into the clearing lay 3 or 4 Argentinians visibly shaking visibly close together on the ground. We ran, half-walked through a deadly, sickening area of death. They looked up as we arrived. All had been seriously wounded and were moaning and crying. One held up his hands across his eyes and shouted, "Mama." I felt he thought that we were, or I was, about to shoot him. He went on calling for his mama in a low wail. One Argentinian sat in a trance, his eyes wide and staring at nothing. Tears ran down his face, the only sign that he was alive. None of them moved. All looked like they expected to be shot by us, but we ran past. The whole area was littered with weapons, helmets, clothing, and food and ammo. A few bullets whizzed overhead and smashed into the rocks. A corporal shouted that Tumbledown, this is another prominent terrain feature, Tumbledown was firing at us. We ran into a tight gap in the path and all came to an abrupt halt as it was a dead end. 4 or 5 bodies lay sprawled there close together. This time they were our own men. The camouflaged pair of smocks hit my eyes immediately. CSM Wicks was standing over them like a guardian, screaming at some of his men to cover the further end of the path in a small crest. The CSM and Sergeant P exchanged quick words. I wasn't listening. My mind was totally occupied with looking into the crags for the enemy. I turned to look at our own lads, dead on the ground, mowed down when they tried to rush through this gap. I felt both anger and sadness. The CSM's face showed the strain of having seen most of his company either wounded or shot dead. That night's fighting was written in every line of his face. We all doubled back into the clearing we had just run through. We spread out and waited for our next move. A wounded Argentinian lay right next to me 10 meters away. He'd been hit in the chest and screamed as he held the wound. A lad from B Company ran across the clearing at him and ran his bayonet through him. The screaming Argentinian tried to grab the bayonet from him before it took his life. Our lad screamed, "Shut up! Shut up, you cunt!" The enemy soldier died as the bayonet was withdrawn. The lad walked back to his seat among the rocks, as if nothing had happened. To my right, 3 Argentinians were crying with their heads in their hands. Were they the dead man's friends? At their feet lay one of our lads, moaning in pain as a medic attended to him. I could see his back was peppered with shrapnel. I swung to my left and fell against some rocks. I now felt the shock of it all coursing through my body. I wailed softly, my throat feeling like I wanted to choke. My eyes watered, and I shook my head to force myself into reality. But this was reality. I looked for Bob and Johnny. I couldn't see Bob, but Johnny was there staring right at me. Our eyes met, telling each other that we felt the end had come. A lad, resting with his rifle pointed towards Tumbledown, turned, fell into a tight ball, curling himself up as he hit the ground, screaming, "Incoming! Incoming!" We all dropped to the ground, crawling behind rocks wherever we could. The first shell went over us onto the west side of the mountain. Then the shells started to creep up towards us, and one thump into the clearing, hitting a rock about 30 meters away. The ground shook as if we'd been hit by an earthquake. Shrapnel pierced the ground or bounced off of rocks all around us. Grant Grinham screamed out. Shrapnel had hit his leg. 2 of his mates were pulling him into better cover as the shells rained down around us again. Soon after, Corporal Stuart McLaughlin was hit in the back by shrapnel. He was later killed by a direct mortar hit as he was being taken to a first aid post. I lay there trembling as shells roared over us. Each explosion shook more fear into us. We had centered our group about halfway along the mountain. The OC shouted us to split up a bit, otherwise a direct hit would cause a heavy loss. 3 or 4 anti-tank lads got up and ran to a bunker on the other side of the hill as another salvo came rushing in on us. A shell crashed into the rock above the OC, sending shrapnel and rock in the opposite direction to us. He looked up at all of us as we looked at him, expecting him to be dead, since the shell had only landed a few meters from us all. He shouted across, "Well, that was a naughty one, wasn't it?" We laughed, unanimous in appreciation of his complete calm. The shells came in for over an hour. We just lay there, hoping, praying that it would end soon. I lay looking straight into Johnny's face, who at times would poke out his tongue or do his grin again. The shelling stopped, as usual, as suddenly as it had began. I stood up and saw Kev Connery crouched by a rock. "Kev," I screamed. He looked over and smiled. "Get your arse over here, you twat." He had started to walk towards us when 2 or 3 more shells hit home. We all flopped to the ground once more. The vibration of the explosions shook us and the earth landed on our backs. We jumped up to see Kev running towards us. He jumped into our little opening. "Jesus, fuck me," he said. "I've had a right night of it too." "Where's Johnny Crow and Skitty, mate?" I asked. Kev looked into my face and said, "Johnny's dead." "He's dead, Vince. Killed outright. Skitty's been wounded. Only me left." "Oh, for fuck's sake. How?" "In the attack, a burst of rounds hit Johnny square in the chest. I reckon he was dead before he hit the ground," Kev explained. We carried on chatting about the situation in general. Rick Westy was brewing up for us when we heard the booming sound again from Stanley. "Incoming!" someone screamed. "Not again!" Johnny shouted. We were getting more scared with each bombardment. We hit the ground and fought to get legs, arms, and bodies more comfy and secure than each other's. "At this rate, they'll get us. We can't have luck on our side forever, you know," I shouted as the shells exploded around us. I lay next to Kev. We both faced the mess tin, where a cuppa was brewing. A shell landed not 3 meters away, sending shrapnel and dirt in our direction. Rocks and earth fell around us, then over us, as if we were about to be buried alive. Both Kev and I automatically reached out to cover the mess tin and the water that was coming to a boil. The dirt landed on our hands, and the brew was saved. Everyone burst out laughing. "Talk about a time of crisis to all let's have a cup of tea," Johnny shouted. Brutal. The great account, and I know we've gone through a lot of accounts of being shelled with artillery. That's a very descriptive and granular one. And it's not over. Back to the book. Kev and I walked up and over the hill. Ricky followed us armed with a smock order, with every pocket filled with mags for our SLRs. We came to a clearing. Ricky was busy looking to one side of us when suddenly Kev and I heard moaning. We stepped up on a ledge and came face to face with a wounded RG. Sitting beside him was his friend, who obviously wouldn't leave him. The wounded soldier had been shot in both knees and in his chest and arms. Blood showed on all the wounds. His face showed no pain, merely pleading. His mate stood up and put his hands up. No one had seen these two until now. I pointed my rifle and bayonet and nodded towards the wounded guy. He started wailing and moaning and put both hands together as if praying to me. Kev pulled a pistol from his belt. "Well, Vince, we either shoot them or help them. What will it be?" Kev lowered his pistol and looked at me. I raised my rifle and framed the wounded RG's head right in the sight. The man looked down as if he was expecting death, knowing that he could do nothing about it. He wailed louder. I lowered my rifle. "Kev, he looks like my neighbor. I'll help them, okay?" "Yeah, okay. I'm off to find some goodies." He walked off. I motioned to his mate to sit on the other side of the wounded guy while I placed my weapon to one side of me and went down to help. The wounded RG's mate shook his head, looking at my rifle. Me friend, you friend. You help my friend. We all friends now," he pleaded. I looked at him and gave him a small grin. He grinned back. I didn't trust him one bit. The wounded guy started to cry. It was then that I felt sad. Sad that I had thought of killing them and that we were all in this mess together. We had different views and different homes, but there we were all together. I still hated the enemy, but just then, when that guy started to cry, I felt different. We all had to be hard to the facts of what was happening to all of us. Kill or be killed. I made my way back to where our team was stationed. I got there as Rick was sitting down. The OC was busy with orders. "Vince, we're out of water. Got any?" Johnny asked. "No," I replied. Just then, Captain Mason shouted, "Had any of you seen Peter Hediker around?" "I saw him last night with Ginge and West, sir," I shouted. "Perhaps Westy will know." Captain Mason looked at me with serious eyes. All the support team who were sitting there looked at Captain Mason and me. I felt something was wrong. The OC motioned me over. I got to him and crouched down. "Corporal B, Ginge McCarthy was killed, and so was Philip West. The shell was meant for your gun team." A flashback of what had happened filled my mind. The smock pulled from my back, the spinning head, the deafness. "It must have missed you by inches, Corporal B. You okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay. I'll go find Hediker then." Captain Mason came over. "Sir," he said to the OC, "Pete Hediker was killed also. The bearers have now found his body." I stood up and walked back to my spot. I was gutted beyond belief. Pete had always been my mate. We'd spent many times together drinking in the shop. I met his family too. Now he was dead. Only a short while ago I'd been sitting beside him. He'd said what a good spot he had. Now he was dead, killed by a shell that was meant for me. I'll never forget that I survived while he was killed. So they do some movement. They actually get back up into their positions to where they were, actually to where Ginge had been when he had been killed. Going back to the book, we turned around to where Ginge had lain and walked back from the skyline to find the gap through which Sergeant P had led us. In this way, we avoided being seen from Tumbledown. On the ground, I saw bits of clothing and flesh. Everywhere resembled a slaughter yard. We walked down 10 meters or so, and there was more and more. Stuck on the side of a rock was clearly a large piece. Johnny and I moved closer to it, and my stomach churned as I saw the nose and cheek of a face. We looked at each other, our eyes wide. I put my bayonet under the flesh and flicked it to the ground before burying it quickly. Neither of us spoke. I had no doubts, and Pete M. confirmed to me that this was the remains of a mate. Pete told me later that he had died instantly, for only the waist down remained. I felt gutted beyond belief. I had been told of the direct hit that had also killed 2 others. To see it with my own eyes, the body and remains, was another story. Walking over the crest, we bumped into Pat Harley. With him were 1 or 2 others, although I no longer remember who they were. As I was talking to Pat, I noticed a helmet on the end of an SLR planted in the rock face. Nodding towards this, Pat mentioned that he had come up and found Geordie Lang dead. We rounded the rock face, and at our feet lay Doc and Geordie, both on their backs. They had died in an open space, with the infamous Tumbledown looking down on them. Geordie had died trying to save Doc. The bastard sniper had caught him in the open as he reached him. Geordie lay with his mouth slightly open. Gunshot wounds to his chest and stomach meant he died quickly. Evidence around him showed that he had tried to reach Doc. Had he been calling for help himself? Pat, looking cut up, took Geordie's fags, saying he'd want us to have these rather than the rear echelon. We turned our attention to Doc, who was more depressing. Doc hadn't died quickly. He must, in fact, have been fully aware of his injuries. The top part of his skull was blown away, the brain visible, smashed by a sniper's bullet. Only the fragmented skull had prevented the complete collapse of the side of his head. How he survived the impact, God knows. Laying beside him were items from the first aid kit he'd been carrying. A field dressing, half open, safety pins in his right hand fingers near the ground. His left hand held a morphine syringe. This had been used, the thin needle pointed towards him. It must have been his dying act. His radio mic was still attached to his throat. A close friend told me many months later, Doc fell on his radio. The sending switch was stuck and he was on permanent send to all of us. We could hear him gurgling and moaning as he became aware that he had been shot badly. Vince and sent the Siglers nuts, but we were all helpless. The sniper picked at anyone that moved. Geordie tried and lost his life for it. We eventually had to turn on to the emergency frequency to establish communications again. Doc had remained conscious and eventually died on a part of that mountain, alone with a lad who had bravely tried to rescue him. So, just to explain that, you have what's called a push-to-talk button on your radio.
Yeah.
And however he fell and landed on that push-to-talk so that he was broadcasting his death, and his dying was broadcast over the network for everyone to hear. These guys, they still have to fight. And they get some intelligence. They think there's a counterattack coming. And by the way, this intense fighting is a matter of days. So everything that we're talking about is happening in a couple days. And now they think that there is a counterattack coming. So they dig in, they get in position, they set their machine guns up from where they think the counterattack from the Argentinians is going to come from, and then they start getting mortared again, hit with artillery. Here we go, back to the book. We all hit the ground again as the shell landed. No sooner had I started to pick myself up when a high-pitched scream rushed into my ears, a deadly sound. I can still hear it today. I looked down to where the shell had hit in the same area as before. The ground was smoldering, smoke lifting and evaporating. 5 meters away from the hole lay two bodies. The sight of one of them will stay with me until I die. His parasmock was riddled with smoke escaping from every corner, the arms, bottom, and collar. The lad turned onto his back, screaming, "Oh God, help me, please." I ran down the hill in fright and concern. I dropped to my knees by the screaming soldier. His eyes met mine. Did he register me? I only saw Denzil, Denzel, the character we all loved. I wrenched my eyes to his legs. One was hanging off, ripped to shreds, the bone clearly visible. His screaming churned my stomach. It was like nothing I'd ever heard. He tried to look down at his leg. "Don't fucking look this way," I barked. "Lay back down, hear me?" He dropped to his back, holding his thigh. Jonah Jones, a 9 Squadron lad, came to my side. "Vince, I'll deal with him. You see to him," he said, pointing to Craig Jones. Craig lay very close to Denzel. Clive rushed to help me. Craig hadn't any visible wounds. He lay quietly as Clive tried to talk to him. I tried to pull his smock open and pull his trousers down to check for a wound. Denzel screamed and moaned behind me, "Help me! Help me!" Jonah was busy seeing to his leg. I pulled out my knife and started to cut through Craig's denims and quilted Arctic clothing. My frantic cutting was too slow, and I knew it. The doctor skidded in beside me, pulled out his scissors, and started to cut through Craig's leggings. I pulled the ripped material to one side. We had reached the skin. His legs had massive lacerations in all directions, spilling muscle and bone, but there wasn't hardly any blood. The doctor shouted at me to tie his muscles together. I pulled out my field dressings and tied the lacerations together. The doctor was joined by a medic who went to Denzel. I was half conscious of cries of "Medic, medic, stretcher bearer" all down the hill. Craig was lying still. I slid up beside him and looked into his face. It was pale with no color at all. His eyes stared into my face. "You'll be okay, Craig. Just hang on, mate. Hang on." Clive held his head, stroking his forehead, repeating my words. "Craig, can you hear me?" I shouted. The doctor pulled and tugged frantically at Craig's clothing, trying to reach more obvious wounds. "Craig, you'll be okay. Hang on." He looked at me, and a slight smile came across his face. His eyes laughed at me, bright and wild. His grin spread, then all expression faded. He faded away. "Craig, don't. Keep in there." His eyes closed. He died then and there. He was a young soldier, 20 years of age. The records will say Private Craig Jones. The doctor motioned to Bear to get him on and away. Denzel was also lifted and carried away. I fell onto my bottom. Jonah and Clive patted me on the shoulder. I tried to get up but fell to my knees again. I hadn't realized until then that I was crying without knowing it. I cried with all the pain and sadness. It didn't seem fair. Johnny came to my side and picked me up. He picked up my weapon and started to guide me to our bunker again. I glanced at Steve and Sass. Sass was crying as well, and Steve had his head buried in his hands. I stumbled to our bunker, weeping. When I sat down, Steve Wake put his arm around me and whispered, "You done a brave thing, Vince. I couldn't have gone down there after those shells landed in the same spot. You done all right, mate." His gesture didn't register. I cried with exhaustion, hatred, and pity. Craig and Denzel remain with me today. Craig, who died, and Denzel, who lost a leg and so nearly his life. When people write or tell of experiences of this kind, I know now that they can never really tell the facts for anyone to totally understand. For often, the reader is wrapped in his own make-believe game of war. For me personally, this 5-minute experience changed my whole life and attitude towards war. Wars will always be fought, and I would go again for my beliefs, but I hope never again to see a face fade from me. It took nearly a year after this war for Craig's face to go before I slept. Nearly a year to wipe out Denzel's smock on fire and his scream. Until I die, it will remain a part of me. And because it is war, there is no time to mourn. And soon after that, they are marching for their final assault on Stanley, which is the capital city. Going back to the book, after we had tabbed about 1,000 meters with wireless ridge clearly visible above us, the absence of troops and the silence of guns in Stanley began to produce some puzzled looks along the line of support company. Our OC shouted for a halt. We collapsed on the frosty ground to wait for orders. I looked up at the sky thinking, what now? Who's fucked up this time? Let's just get this part started. A few shouts came down the line. I leant forward and saw that the line was breaking up and the men laughing. Sergeant Mick Matthews was sitting beside me. What's going on, Mick? I asked. Fuck knows, Vince. The shouting continued as messages passed down towards us. A guy 3 or 4 positions down from us suddenly turned round and shouted, "The wankers have surrendered. A white flag is flying over Stanley. Put your berets on Endex. Endex." The last part of the message had an ironic ring because for some of the task force, the whole thing had seemed like an exercise. So Endex is a term, we say it all the time in training. When you want to stop the exercise, you say Endex. It's short for end exercise. So that's one of those things where it seemed like for some of the guys, they were just on this big exercise. Yeah. And so they literally said, hey, it's Endex, end of the exercise right now. Mick and I looked at each other. Bollocks, I said. We stood up to see the remains of 3 para coming off Longdon in their red berets. Joy washed through my body. Mick and I hugged each other. Nothing more was said. The message had reached everyone. I slipped off my helmet and put on my beret, which had stayed close to hand throughout. As I stood looking down at Moody Brook, the red berets stuck out like sore thumbs against the grass. I felt proud. The beret on my head meant more than any task the army had ever thrown at me. It meant victory. The feeling is indescribable. Now, that's that. And they spend, obviously it's over, but it's not like you just get to step and it's instantly over. They spend time there. They go through some pretty significant looting. And he talks about that a bunch, and he kind of he goes kind of berserk in looting, and they're all just gathering up war trophies and whatever they can find of value, and they go into this one sort of a bunkered position to loot, and they on one side of the bunker it's all a bunch of weapons, and the other side is other kind of more personal type items, and they have so many weapons that they don't need anymore, so they go and they start taking stuff from the other side. Little, like I said, personal items, I think it was, and they walk out of there, and then the next day they find out that the side with the weapons on it was all booby trapped, with 70 pounds of explosive.
Dang.
So they went in there. If they would have picked up like 2 or 3 things off of that, it was a pressure plate, a pressure release. So if they would have picked up 2 or 3 things, they would have gotten killed. Him and his crew would have gotten killed, and that's when he realizes, you know, when he talks about it, he's like, I was so greedy, I wasn't even thinking anymore. They go through that. They get done. They ship away and eventually end up to an island, and then from a different island they fly back to England. And here we're going back to the book. We stepped off the plane at RAF Bryce Norton. The next morning, we were hit by the English summer in full blaze. As we entered the airport lounge, the doors were slung open to a screaming crowd of relatives who charged towards us. My mother climbed over chairs to hug me, with all the rest of my family in close pursuit. My wife came up to me. I was tense and made unsure by all the noise and shouting. It made me scared in a peculiar way. Karen looked hard and almost angry. "Hello, Vince," was all I got from her. So he's home. Obviously, his wife was a little bit tense about some things. Back to the book. Actually, before we go back to the book, they do a little quick greeting with their family, but then they get back on a bus with the rest of the people, the battalion members, and they start driving back to their compound. Back to the book. All was very quiet on the journey. The English countryside made me feel like an alien. Johnny tapped my shoulder from behind. "Vince, the trees, man. Look at them." I looked at the trees. They were part of what was making me feel like an alien. They were all in full bloom, bright green leaves in the wind. There was traffic on the roads, shops, people walking about, doing their own thing. It all seemed unreal. After only 3 months away, it was a shock to see civilization again. The odd thing was, I felt anger. Anger at everyone for doing their own thing. It was as if something in my head was urging me to shout at them as they walked along the streets. "Hey, you, licking your fucking ice creams. There's a fucking lot of injured guys over there." Friends have been killed, but all you're interested in is yourselves. Just frustration, I know. The general public was concerned, but it just didn't seem like it then. I wasn't expecting a medal or even a pat on the back. I really didn't know what to expect. Even so, I found it hard to be calm. There was no way I could relax. If I had been asked to go do a tour in Ireland, I would have gone. More than anything, I felt the pinch of no longer having my friends around me. We had been together so tightly over the last few months that it was as if now I had had an arm severed. The buddy-buddy system that we had needed to literally survive wasn't there anymore. And the sheltered life now seemed to me far too boring to endure. I made a point of not talking about my experiences to any member of my family, including my wife, but I do remember sitting up in bed one evening, turning to my wife, and giving her a very mild insight into what had really happened. I was sick to death of the press's views and of the publicity of a country still high on war. I told Karen what had happened to Denzel and Jones. The blank look she gave me, with a half smile, told me she wasn't interested and couldn't understand me at all. I never said anything again. I tried to look at it from her point of view instead. She was sick of the war, of the army, and of me going away. Whenever I bumped into one of the lads, I seemed more at home and relaxed talking our private language with him than I did with civvies and my own family. If I had had my own way, I would have gone out on the biggest bender ever. But I knew that was the easy way out. You know, these remind me of One Soldier's War. You know, you come back and there's no doubt when you come back from war, you're going to feel some of this. I'm going to tell you right now, You're going to feel some of this when you see civilians walking around licking their ice cream cones. It's a rough transition.
Yeah.
Back to the book. There's no doubt that I was slowly unwinding over the long leave, but the boredom also gave me more time to think about my experiences. Worst of all were my nightmares about the war. At first they came nightly. Later they faded and returned intermittently. I always had the same dream of Denzel's smock and Jones's face passing before me. I would wake up in a bed so wet that a bucket of water might have been thrown over me. The nightmares lasted about 6 months or so. Today I can see and understand everything that has happened to me. I know now that I wasn't alone. The most comforting words I ever had to help me did not come from any of my family. My family were concerned, but could never really understand what I was going through. Those words came from my friends in the pub as we drank during leave. Johnny turned to me and said, "Vince, I've had a few turns in the night, you know." That made me sit up and see clearly that I wasn't alone. And when you're not alone, you're stronger. So that's something that I know I hear from a lot of vets. And maybe you're thinking that this is something you're experiencing that no one else is. Not true. Not only are other guys going through it, other guys have always gone through it. You're not alone. Back to the book. I fully believe that we as a nation performed the most excellent of tasks. I am fully behind the decision to send the task force, and I wouldn't hesitate to fight again for our country and its beliefs. People who whinge about the decisions taken in war they weren't involved in, to me, are the most misguided of all. The most striking events to affect me throughout the war were obviously the deaths of my friends. 8 years ago, I regarded those friends as those in 2 and 3 paras only. Now, after learning about others' experiences and after watching and reading others' accounts, I see that the whole task force was my friend. I watched a Marine sergeant in a TV documentary, his eyes showing the emotion of his story, and the sight told me we were all the same. I still feel a bit angry that the wounded went unnoticed. A propaganda film on the task force's arrival home showed only the paras and the Marines and the Navy homecoming. Can you remember seeing the badly wounded coming through the gates? I think not. Nobody wants to see the effects of carnage. Never again will I think that war is just a game. Like they show it on TV, it is very different from how it is portrayed in books and films. We con ourselves into the killing game, don't we? I remember very clearly watching from a window of my quarters 5 or 6 kids playing a war game. Some were even dressed in combat gear and carrying small toy machine guns. I watched with interest in their tactics in attacking a cardboard box that was meant to be an enemy-held position. The 2 kids defending rolled over and pretended to die when overrun by the goodies. After being tigged by their friends, they got up to resume the game. From knee high, we start to practice what is in human nature, to defend and kill. The one big difference between their game and the real one is that you don't get up after really being shot. War is the legal killing of people and can be very scary. War is kill or be killed. We also must remember that a lot of the command structure at junior rank level can almost be too difficult to maintain in the heat of battle. Then, what becomes a winning factor is the determination of the private soldier. His lone get up and go and do attitude. We must take our hats off to the junior ranks of all services, for they are the backbone of the war machine in that they have to kill at close range. We are lucky to have what is perhaps one of the best fighting forces in the world, thanks to our system of training and to our discipline. Even today, I feel frustration about the war. I was so psyched up to carry on with the fight into Stanley that the Argentinian surrender made me disappointed as well as happy. I try very hard to keep out of fist fights now, as I wouldn't like to lose my self-control. Am I alone in feeling this? Or are there hundreds or thousands of other time bombs out there? Other experienced veterans may be sympathetic to all I've said. We can only wait for the next war now to practice the art of killing again. I hope I'm there to help. Finally, I must quote a First World War veteran who told me so many years before I joined the Army. You'll like the Army, Vince, but not war. It's horrible, boy. He was right. I didn't like it. Then again, I did. And I'm going to close this book out with the beginning of this book. And it reads, "This book is dedicated to the soldiers of 3 Para, whose comradeship and determination throughout the campaign make the author proud to have served with them, so that the members of 3 Para who never returned are not forgotten. Their names and ages at death in action are listed below. Private Richard Absalom, military medal, 19 years old. Private Gerald Bull, 18. Private Jason Burt, 17. Private John Crow, 21. Private Mark Dodsworth, 24. Private Anthony Greenwood, 22. Private Neil Groves, 18. Private Peter Hedeker, 22. Lance Corporal Peter Higgs, 23. Corporal Stephen Hope, 27. Private Timothy Jenkins, 19. Private Craig Jones, 20. Private Stuart Lang, 20. Lance Corporal Christopher Lovett, 24. Corporal Keith McCarthy, 27. Sergeant Ian McKay, Victoria Cross, 29. Corporal Stuart McLaughlin, 27. Lance Corporal James Murdoch, 25. Lance Corporal David Scott, 24. Private Ian Scrivens, 17. Corporal Alex Shaw, 25. Private Philip West, 19. And you notice those names, those men, their ages and their ranks. They're all junior ranks. The one sergeant Ian McKay, who was awarded the Victoria Cross for storming a 50 caliber machine gun position, but the rest of those men are privates and lance corporals and corporals. Young men. And as Kipling pointed out, they're no plaster saints by any stretch. But damn. They might not be saints. But I've known men like these. And I've seen them with my eyes. And as I have said, and as this tale of the Falklands confirms once again, war is hell, and it's a hell that can bring out the worst in men, but it can also bring out the best. And don't forget these young men who, like so many others, answered the call and fought and died in that awful place to protect their brothers. And furthermore, and if you read this book, you will realize that we all have a little bit more to give. Mentally and physically. You can go further. You can push harder. You can be more ruthless if you have to be. And you can also show more mercy. You can be better. I can be better. We can all be better. And we most often get better not from the easy things and not from the good times, but from the hard times and the challenges and the suffering in life that pushes you to your breaking point and demands that you give absolutely everything you have. But you have to keep going. So, no matter what, keep going. And I think that's all that I've got for tonight. It's a rough one.
Yeah. It's crazy how how it got that crazy, that vicious in like that short period of time.
It is, and we got to remember that's what we have, one perspective from one squad in one platoon, and there was, you know, the story of Two-Pair, the one where the battalion commander, H. Jones, won the Victoria Cross, by the way. What about that? What about that story?
Yeah.
And not to mention the Royal Marines that were down there as well. What about their stories?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that just, I still can't wrap my head around the amount of untold stories that there are. And not just the fact of the stories, but to think that because this battle was a very short time compared to Vietnam or World War II or World War I, or even the wars that we've been fighting today that have been going on for years and years and years. But it's not so much that the story that like we're missing the story, but these people existed everywhere.
Yeah.
And they exist everywhere. And yeah, it's an incredible, to take a look at the book, buy the book, and read it. And I got into some of the graphic stuff. Some of the interaction to them when they're not in combat is actually, it's real crude. And I didn't cover much of it. Not that I wanted to get to more of the combat concentration. That's kind of, I didn't realize that I didn't cover as much as sort of just the straight up crude behavior that they. I mean, they're on the boat for a while. They're drinking. They're getting drunk when they're coming home. There's some crude behavior and things that are taking place, and that's kind of why I jumped on the opportunity to read Tommy by Kipling, because that's totally true. Then you know what they say in kind of our way of saying that in the SEAL teams? We would say this: that guy's a in case of war break glass kind of guy.
Oh yeah.
Meaning we don't want him around all the time. We want to keep him over here on the side.
In the glass.
But yeah, if something happens, break glass and we'll get this frogman out. Now, what's jacked up about that is that played more of a role when I was first in the SEAL teams, and the older I got and the more mature I got, the more I realized like that's okay, but it doesn't really work. What you need is to have someone that you can have out of the glass, and that learns. And what you have to do as a leader is you take those guys that, instead of putting those guys in a glass jar or behind in a glass box somewhere and keep them there in case of war, what you do is you do what you do with a freaking wild dog. You have to train them. You have to bring them out. You have to socialize them amongst the humans so that they can interact. Because a guy that you have to keep in behind a glass barrier from the rest of the world, the chances of you needing him for that type of situation are pretty minimal. So what about all the other situations that he'd be beneficial for? So what you have to do as a leader is teach those guys that have the attitude of, I'm just a nothing but a straight warrior, don't care about anything else, I'm here to go to war, otherwise leave me alone. What you want to do is you want to get those guys out into the world, socialize them like a good attack dog that's not going to bite anything in front of it. It's going to actually bite what you want it to bite. And then you have something that's a much more valuable, not only for you as a leader, but for them. Because they have a much better opportunity. So there's still a few guys left in the old mold of in case of war break glass, but most of the guys now are actually more versatile than that. And I'll tell you, when I was young, I was probably falling in that category.
You're the break glass guy.
I wasn't exactly the guy you wanted to throw out in front of the admiral to look at, right? And say, oh, this is our model guy right here. It's, it wouldn't have been that way. Now, as the older I got, the more I recognized how important having that both sides of the coin covered. And you couldn't just be a freaking rampaging berserker all the time. You had to actually be a professional.
Sure.
You had to be a professional. And so I definitely had my share of time spent in that zone back in the day. But what's good is I think guys knew that about me, and that therefore when I came up to him and said, "Hey man, look, we got to do better than that," or "Hey, we can't be acting like that," they knew that I wasn't coming to them from a what's that word? From the ivory tower.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking down on them like, "Oh, I can't believe you'd act that way.
Right.
We don't act that way. We're naval representatives." I wasn't coming to him like that.
Right.
I was coming to him, "Hey, we're professionals. We want to get hired to do jobs. We want to kill bad guys. We got to get missions. We got to get mission approval." Those were the things that I kind of passed on to my guys.
Yeah.
Was, "Hey, that's cool. Be a frogman, but be a disciplined frogman.
Yeah.
Be a frogman that can represent." And I think that's another thing in the book when there's no war going on. How are they? They're kind of maniacs,
Yeah.
And then when the war breaks out, they go even more maniac style. And it's almost like they get into that mode of like, "Oh, who cares anyways?
Yeah.
We're gonna die. We're gonna die. We just who cares?"
Right.
But after you go to war for an extended period of time, you're like, actually, you're not gonna die.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a decent chance you're gonna live, and there's a decent chance that you need to continue to build, the reputation of the SEAL teams, not just as we're killers, but we're professionals.
Yeah.
So, and we should have a reputation of both, and we do, by the way.
I think so.
Professional killers is right. But yeah, it's a great book. There's a lot to learn from it. There's a lot to learn. Again, that the way that they're going from peacetime, and again, I know that they were doing tours in Ireland at the time, and that was no joke. And they took casualties in Ireland, and there was many soldiers killed in Northern Ireland. But that wasn't comparable to what they went through in the Falklands. So it was interesting to see how they handled approaching combat for the first time.
Yeah, another part that I think these books really bring to light is just the physical conditions that they go into. Even talking to you guys, when you guys talk about how hot it is, then every once in a while you'll add a detail like, "Oh yeah, so I'm like, all my clothes are all wet from my sweat." And usually that's not part of the movie when you watch the movie, or like these guys, his feet are falling off, because it's cold and
I
numb.
was sitting in a combat outpost in Ramadi, and it was nighttime, right? The coolest part of the day. And I wasn't doing anything, and I hadn't been doing anything in a while. I was literally sitting in a combat outpost. The boys were out in an Overwatch position, and I was back there. I'd been coordinating, but I did it. It wasn't that established of a combat outpost yet, so I still had all my gear on, but I was just sitting there. I'd been sitting there for, let's call it 2, 3, 4 hours. And I was sitting there, and I just kind of I was sitting down, and I angled my back to like a 45-degree angle, and I was kind of looking at the ground, kind of resting a little bit. And as I looked down, I was full athletic sweat dripping off me like that fast. And I wasn't doing anything.
Yeah. That's
So,
that's the bait. That's
It
where you
gets hot.
start
Yeah,
with.
that's where you start.
Not to mention the guy's legs getting blown off, all this stuff, all these. Yeah, man. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's the physical, and the other big thing is the physical conditioning that you need to be prepared for is humping with a rucksack on.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. They don't show a lot of that.
No.
In any kind of military training, they don't just show it. They don't show it enough. They should.
Yeah.
They should. I mean, we just did another trip up to Yosemite, and we got our boots on.
Sure.
And it's if you're not conditioned for that, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And you can make it through a day.
Yeah.
Maybe you can make it through 2 days, but also you're not carrying. I was telling my kids up there, up in the mountains, you're not carrying any weight compared to what you carry with when you have gear. When you go tactical, you probably have 30 pounds maybe. If you're just camping or whatever, you got a couple liters of water. You got a sleeping bag and a ground pad. You got some trail mix, maybe a little bit more food, but you're talking 30, 40 pounds. Tops.
Yeah.
You get geared up, bro. I would weigh guys before we'd send them out on training operations. I'd weigh them. Training operations. Their rucks would weigh like 110 pounds. Your gear alone, your body armor, helmet, ammo, magazines and ammo, grenades, you're 60, 70 pounds. Then you put water in it. You're talking. I think I weighed like 310 or something with my gear on. Seriously.
Like RoboCop.
Yeah.
No,
I don't know about
RoboCop's
that.
so heavy on Rogue. I think it was part 2 where he shocks himself because he wants to get rid of the messed up directives he got given. He falls down. Right, he's unconscious, and then they're like, "Hey, we gotta help him." They try to pick him up.
Oh, he's
all
too heavy
heavy
to move.
Yeah.
That
Same
actually
thing.
happened to. We were on a training exercise in TU Bruiser,
Sure.
and I got put down. They said, "Hey, Jocko, you're dead." So I laid down, and I just laid there. And Leif came over to throw me in the back of the Humvee. And I was like RoboCop down there. So Leif got a couple buddies, and he's like, "Hey guys, help me move Jocko." Still not moving.
Dead weight,
And
Jocko.
then they're like, "Okay, yep."
You know, you were like making an extra effort to be dead weight.
Oh, yeah, for
you
sure.
know, like you're like,
I'm
how you do
I'm
that?
fully participating in the training exercise. I wanted those guys to be prepared to put a grenade in my mouth and leave me there. So get some.
Jocko.
Awesome. Well, speaking of lots of stories,
Sure.
maybe you could tell some stories about how to support this
Sure.
podcast.
I'd be happy to.
No,
Hey,
no short
hey,
stories.
hey, did you get into drinking pomegranate white tea and subsequently Jocko white tea because your wife is a Brit and
No.
she's into tea? She
No,
turned you on to tea.
She didn't really, because they drink tea with milk and I don't.
Yeah, but you know, hey,
You can give her
Details.
credit, but
details.
she doesn't get credit for that one.
Does she
gets
drink a lot of
credit for
tea too,
She
or what?
drinks tea. Yeah, she tea drinker.
Put the kettle on.
She says a cup of tea will cure anything. She says, "Oh, cup of tea."
Who's the
tea
guy who
cure
said
anything.
Robitussin cured everything? It's the same thing like that.
I don't know who that was.
Yeah, I think it's like, I don't know, Chris Rock. or
I
something.
don't remember specifically where I got the first cup of Jocko white tea from, but I do remember that it was in the desert when I was at the training command, and I would be giving the debriefs or sitting through the guys' briefs, and
Yeah.
we'd be going on like 2, 3, 4 hours of sleep, so you needed a little bit of kick. And
Yeah.
somewhere I got some tea.
Yeah.
It wasn't yet Jocko white
It's
tea.
just regular pomegranate white tea.
Yeah, and yeah, that's where I drank it. I was like,
Ooh, this is nice.
yeah, this is nice.
The cold one.
Yeah.
Wait, was it cold?
Yeah,
Probably.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah. Well, we definitely had it cold because you're in the desert. You don't want to drink hot tea unless you're British.
Yeah, counterproductive.
They be drinking hot tea no matter what. They don't even drink iced tea. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
really like hot tea that much.
Yeah.
That whole island, they don't really like iced tea. Like, you can't go into a restaurant, oh, some iced tea, they look at you like you're weird,
Yeah.
which
Crazy.
I've been looked at many times there.
Yeah.
for being weird.
Let's face it, you're kind of weird, bro. Sorry. Anyway.
What you got?
If we want to support ourselves, first off, I'm going to talk about my little story. It's not short story, long one.
No, please.
Just kidding. Remember I told you I got into kettlebells?
Compress.
I got the Onnit kettlebells, right? So the first ones I get all the designer ones. They're
Yeah,
cooler.
'cause
My
that's
opinion.
you. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever... Yeah, I used the regular ones before at other gyms. But anyway, I get the cool ones.
Right.
The ones that someone takes a picture of me and I have them, I look like extra cool with the primal...
You can see how different our thought patterns are. in our
Yeah,
world.
yeah, you're here to win. I get it. And I can dig it fully. But I got the chimp ones. Those are, 1 pood,
Okay.
whatever, the 16 kilograms. Went up to the werewolf. Just the other day, I ordered the gorilla.
What's that one?
70-something pounds
Oh, good.
for one. So I got a pair. I incorporate that in. I'm getting stronger, man. I'm getting good at the
Pretty soon
kettlebells.
you're going to need them 88s like I got.
Yeah, wait, what is the one that it's Bigfoot, right?
I don't know what that is, but the biggest kettlebells that I currently have
Yeah.
are 40 kilograms,
Yeah, that's like, yeah.
88 pounds.
Well, it's 90 something because it's 2.2 pounds per kilogram.
Okay.
So it's like, we can do the math if you want, but nonetheless, that's heavy. I don't know. I don't know if I'm ready for that one, given my current exercise program with them. I guess you can do a basic.
Maybe we should start doing math exercises.
Yeah,
apparently,
maybe.
'cause
Or
we
bring
got
a
some issues
calculator
over
or
here.
whichever. Either way, that's the one I got. And so look, hey, I'm going to recommend it. If you're into kettlebells, you want to, get your kettlebells on, get the Onnit ones. They're cooler. That's my opinion.
Cool.
Anyway, a lot of cool stuff
Go
on
with
there.
that.
I got a jump rope and stuff like that too. You know what else I did? 100 burpees in 10 minutes.
Oh, Brandon Pickworth, where you at?
Yeah. So you remember last time
Echo
you mentioned
did it.
Yeah, I did it.
Brandon, just so you know, Echo is now he notoriously bad cardio. Now they're not like that anymore. I'm giving you credit. I'm giving you credit. But still, we could use that as sort of a statement to say, if Echo could do it, come on, Brandon.
Yeah. Actually, I think the statement is, look how far Echo has come.
Look how far Echo has come.
I think that's the statement.
I just made it.
There you go.
Look how
Boom.
far Echo has come.
So,
that he can do 100 burpees. A lot of people think 100 burpees in 10 minutes is a joke, actually.
Yeah, I could dig it. I mean, I've been doing burpees for a while. Not that kind, not the kind. They're just in my routine. So I don't do that many, but I'm familiar with them. So I'm like, okay, you can, how you can kind of gauge, like, okay, I do this many. So what would 100 take out of me?
Yeah.
Can I do that?
You do 40, 30, 20, 10.
Yeah. So how I did it was 25, 1 minute rest, 25, 1 minute rest, 25, 1 minute rest, 15, and then like a 2 minute, minute and a half, maybe, I don't know, something like that, give or take, and then 10. And actually, 11. I did 101 burpees, and it was 9 minutes flat.
That's good.
Yeah.
Brandon, what you got?
Here's what I found. I don't know if my cardio is good or bad. It's better than it has been.
It's better
in a long
been,
time.
Yeah.
Just in general, even jiu-jitsu and other stuff.
What's the other stuff all of a sudden?
When you run and I don't know, get nuts.
Groceries.
Yeah, whatever. Hey, life, man. Sometimes life throws physical challenges at you. Either way. So yeah, I did 101 in 9 minutes flat. What it was I wasn't breathing as hard as maybe you might think. Like,
so you could have gone harder.
That wasn't the issue. Wasn't the breathing? It was like just boom, push up and squat and push up and jump and push. The lactic acid.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But
where'd you feel it? Legs?
Weird. Yeah, legs fully, shoulders, not chest. Like, I think doing a push up one every second isn't that much for me. But strangely, my shoulders and this part, what do you call these? The serrats. They were like sore the next day in a weird way. It was weird, man. Nonetheless, yeah.
Well, that proves that burpees are a good exercise.
Yes, fully.
Got you some funky workout there.
Yeah, it's good. And then so I go on YouTube, I see this one, a guy does 100 in a row. I'm like, dang. Because 25 I didn't know. I was going to be like, hey, I'm going to do as many as I can.
How long did it take him to do 100 in a row?
3 minutes and 33 seconds, if I'm not mistaken.
That's credit.
Yeah. You know what? Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. I think it's a thing. I don't know if it's a thing or not. That's why I'm asking the question. Okay, so what really is a burpee? I mean, as far as so when I first started doing burpees, I wouldn't do
a burpee is your chest touch the ground, then you jump up in the air.
Okay. So what about my hands? Do they have to go above my head, or can they be here?
Technically, yes. Technically, it's a little clap over the head.
Oh, a clap. So what do you mean over the head? Technically, it has to be above the head. So if I go like this, or does it have to be? Because I see you guys doing this.
I do a little bit of everything, and depending on how tired I am.
Okay.
If you see when I'm really tired, my clap is barely happening, and it's happening like 6 inches in front of my belly.
Yeah. Okay. So here,
but if you want to be technical,
yeah.
Oh, I mean, a really technical, perfect burpee would be like both hands clapping up above your head as you're 6 inches in the air.
Yeah.
You can't do too many of those. Well, you can't do as many of those, though.
No.
I'm here to tell you.
Not at all. And that's kind of the point.
The difference between the dynamic jump, like a high jump, and not a dynamic jump is real big.
Huge. And so where's the line? Yeah. So
for me, here's the line. Get your hands above your head. Get your feet off the ground.
That's it, right?
Yeah, I think that's...
Yeah, I dig it. I agree. Because otherwise you're like, hey, you didn't jump 3 inches.
Yeah.
But what if, this...
Because if you want to do that, what you do is you put your 135 on the ground, a barbell with 135 on it, and you hop over that thing each time. Chest to the ground on one side, chest to the ground on the other side. Chest to the ground, that's another way. If you're going to require... I like it when you can't cheat. Right? You can't cheat that, right? You have to jump over it.
Yeah, I know. Dang.
That's what's cool about burpee pull-ups. You got to get chest to the ground. Right. I don't care how you do it. Chest to the ground and get your chin over the bar. I don't care what you do in between those two.
Yeah,
that's a burpee pull-up pretty much.
All right. Well, then I have to be honest. Then here's my disclaimer: the push-up. I didn't touch my chest to the ground.
Okay. I mean, was it like an incomplete?
Probably some of them were like a half.
I mean, I guess I don't do. I'm not like every single time. Yeah.
Here's the thing. It's to your discretion, right? It's like
that's
when you didn't do a burpee.
Let's face it. If we wanted to, get some Guinness Book of World Record scenario, then sure.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. You know what a burpee is.
Yeah.
I know what a burpee is.
Yeah.
Get it right.
Yeah. So mine, and just to kind of, in the spirit of honesty, so I didn't touch my
Because
chest.
here's the thing. If I was to, on the push-up part, if you touch your chest over every time, you actually slow down enough that it's not hitting your cardio as much.
Yeah, potentially.
In my opinion.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I guess add it up. Yeah, I guess. And you know what I saw, though? When I saw the guy doing the burpees, he was on a, I think it was just a regular gym floor, maybe a mat or something. And he was doing it, and after a while, he starts banging his chest. Like,
he's cheating.
So I'm like,
a little bit.
you're getting a bounce on the bench.
Bounce.
Same thing. Yeah, getting a little bounce. So I'm thinking, you know what? That could be easier. For me, if I did it on a mat, I think it'd be easier than having to stop your body weight and not touch, you know. But it's going to be what you're used to for sure. But I didn't touch my chest. And there were like 4 of them that I didn't put, like 4, because when I started the set, I'm like, oh shoot, those, 2 or 3, I didn't put my hands above my head, so then
Restart.
I had to so maybe like 4 or 5 of them didn't technically count, but I feel like if I would have put my hands above my head on those 4, it wouldn't have made a difference. That's what I think. But if I'm like, the kind where I'm filming at the muster, I'm filming this girl, she's doing the perfect burpee while I'm filming her. Chest to the ground. In fact, when she went chest to ground, her hands came up off the ground. Just for like a second. Yeah. I'm like, dang, this girl's getting the whole.
What do they call those? I think they call those game day push-ups. I don't know why. I don't. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just call them that.
Yeah.
Which is weird because I don't even have a game day. Every day is game day.
So that's why you call them that. Do that every day. But either way, she's doing that, and then she's going into the and her hands are straight in the air, like she's straight up putting effort into.
Was this in the San Diego muster?
No, not Texas. I put the clip in the video.
Okay,
slow motion.
I'll check it out.
Yeah, and she had the perfect form,
full beast mode,
full on, and I'm thinking, when I see that compared to the 101 that I did, no, night and day, man. They're going to be like, hey, he's not doing this whole part
he ain't
right
doing
here.
That thing.
My hands are going like this. They're going like this. So they're above my head.
You know what?
But I'm going like this.
Maybe Brandon Pickworth is doing 8-inch or 12-inch vertical leap on each one like a beast. And we're calling him out. And he's actually
I know he's doing it the correct way.
Sorry, Brandon, if that's the case. All right.
All good. Well, the goal is now 100. I'm going to follow the protocol. I know when I'm doing
100?
Yeah, like in a row.
Yeah. That'd be good.
Yeah. I'm gonna follow the protocol for sure. I'll report back. Anyway, back to the kettlebells. That's a good one. The jump rope stuff. That's a good one. The On-It ones. That's the cool ones. My opinion. Just go on there, check it out. Go onit.com/Jocko. Boom. Support yourself and the podcast. Also, good way to support when you buy these books that Jocko reviews. That I chime into every once in a while. Go to our the website jockopodcast.com.
You didn't chime in much today.
Yeah, man, I was all listening.
Kind of a
today.
heavy one.
Yeah, heavy, and I don't have nothing to... So, you know what part I was going to chime in?
What?
I
respect your decision, but I respect your decision not to chime in.
Got it. Well, you know how you're like... It was at the end anyway, where you were like, this is just one story.
Yeah.
You take, and it's literally a sliver, really.
Yeah, it is.
It's a sliver. It's one guy in one story.
It's one guy. There was 4,000 or 5,000 British servicemen down there.
Yeah.
It's 1/4,000th.
So this was my comparison. You know when you're driving in traffic or on the street, whatever, the freeway, and all you see is cars. Oh my God, infinite cars. Traffic is everywhere. Just cars and cars and cars. And that's nothing new. In fact, it's kind of irritating, really. But if you just take one little step, like in your mind, and look in the car, and look, that's a person in there. And sometimes 2 people in there. Sometimes little family. Each one of those people has their whole life story. All the little ups and downs and special things and, challenges, struggles, triumphs, all that stuff. Tragedies. Each one of those little things, there's a little guy in there. And even then, that's nobody compared to everybody. So that's the analogy I was going to make. But it seems kind of trivial, compared to like... guys on the freeway.
I like how you're starting to self-police.
Yeah, I got to self-police, man. Anyway, back to these books. If you want to get any of these books, one or more, whatever, they're listed by episode on the website, jockopodcast.com.
And by the way, we started off today before we hit record.
Sure.
I said to Echo, you know how you heard the what's that saying? Don't judge a book by its cover. The cover of this book, you can judge it by. It's called Excursion to Hell by Lance Corporal Vincent Bramley. And the picture on the cover looks like hell. It looks like it's a picture of him. It's blown up real big, but yeah, you can judge a book by its cover. You can tell it's going to be a rough story.
Yeah, looks like he took a straight up excursion to hell on that cover. But if you want this book, go to jockopodcast.com. Set a little tab on the top, top menu, whatever. Books from podcast, Jocko Podcast books, whatever it's called. Boom, they're listed there by episode. Click through there. Get it through there. Good way to support yourself, of course. And the podcast takes you to Amazon. Also,
what if you do other shopping?
Any other shopping?
Oh, that's a bonus.
Bonus. That's
what if you buy something massive?
Good. Awesome.
That still supports more.
Big time. Yeah, like what? Like a 100 terabyte hard drive.
How much does that cost?
Like $4 to $5 grand.
Oh.
Not 45 grand, 4 to 5.
Oh, okay.
So like 40. It depends which one you get. Or like a lawnmower. Can you buy a lawnmower from Amazon?
I think you can buy anything on Amazon.
You can now, huh?
Yeah.
What do? They come with a big forklift truck and be
Lawnmowers
like, hey.
aren't that big, dude.
Well, no. I'm sorry. I'm thinking driving lawnmower.
Oh,
so
yeah.
what do?
That's a good
They back
question.
it up. Here's your
I don't know if you can get
lawnmower.
that one.
I don't know. You probably can.
Maybe.
Okay, a treadmill. I know you can get a treadmill from
Yeah,
Amazon.
treadmills are pretty big.
Well, either way, you can do your shopping. Boom. Click through there. Takes like 2 seconds. It's a small action, really. Big reaction by way of support.
I actually have been thinking that is actually not the best analogy that you've been using for so long.
You would think that, but you'd be wrong.
I think you ever heard of the expression death by 1,000 cuts?
Yes.
It's more like that, even though it's life by 1,000 clicks.
Sure.
Yeah.
Support by 1,000 clicks.
Something like that.
Yeah, man, I dig it.
Because they all add up together.
Yeah.
Because the sodium's little, but it's big. But you have to join it with all the other ones.
Yeah, so now you have a bunch of little sodiums. Boom, huge reaction. Huge support. Widespread, huge support by this little action from this. You know what it is? Actually, the sodium's better. Because look, if I'm clicking through, I'm listening to this podcast, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to support. I'm going to buy one of these books. I'm going to buy lawnmowers, treadmill, whatever. I click through the website. Just that 2 seconds of going to the website first, clicking through. That's like so much potential in my click, just like the sodium. So much potential energy in there, especially when you mix it with the water. You mix it with the Amazon, the click, boom. Support, you follow.
We can move on.
Yeah, there you go. See? Backs up my point.
I apologize to everyone for egging that on in some manner.
Yeah, well, I respect your extreme ownership in the situation.
It's my fault.
Just know what you're going to do to fix it next time. Or you could subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play if you haven't already. I think it seems, well, I don't want to say it seems obvious, but
yeah, if you don't, you should.
If you haven't, yeah, that's a good way to support. Yeah, cool. Stay updated, all that stuff. Also on YouTube, subscribe to that one. I've been putting some stuff.
This is kind of weird to me because we don't have that many YouTube subscribers.
I forget how many I looked, but
it's not a ton. It's not as many people as listen to the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. But not a lot of people are like on YouTube.
Okay.
I'm gonna watch, Jocko on YouTube.
Yeah,
like that. You're less compelled to do that, especially if you're not on YouTube. Just to. But
what if you miss some of them deleted scenes?
Yeah, that's something. But consider like if you never go. On YouTube
I was working with a group this last week, and they're full on caught up on the podcast. Every single episode, legit dudes getting after it. And I mentioned the deleted scene that came out, and there was 3 of them. None of them had seen it.
Oh, see, there you
none
go.
of them had seen it, and that's a good scene. It's funny, anyways.
Yeah,
I know I use bad language, but
it's kind of refreshing, bro. You know how you can cut loose. You're like, Jocko's always on. You were off. No, you were on. You were in a different way.
I was on. I was going off.
Yeah.
So subscribe to the YouTube channel.
If you're on YouTube, or if you're thinking about getting on YouTube, go ahead, start there. Subscribe. We can be your first subscription, and don't think that it's a
how much is a subscription to?
Nothing. One click.
Oh man, that's
one click.
That's a good deal.
No money. Just click. One click. And here's the thing: it's a total non-commitment situation. You can literally subscribe, and 10 seconds later you can unsubscribe. Then you can do that again. You can do that as many times as you want. It's like so easy. So it's really that's a small action, big reaction situation. Another one. Also, Jocko has a store.
See, that time I stayed quiet. I didn't get lured into your trap.
You just moved on.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, back to the YouTube real quick. There's other stuff. There's other stuff other than just a video version of the podcast. That's kind of the point.
Okay, yeah.
One of the points.
There's other little videos that you put together.
Sure.
Excerpts, we like to call them.
Sure.
Some people call them McNuggets.
Sure, Jocko McNuggets. Yeah, they're on there too. Anyway, Jocko has a store. It's called Jocko Store. JockoStore.com. There's some shirts on there. There's some travel mugs on there. Some bumper stickers on there. We were out of bumper stickers. I didn't know that. Anyway, we got some more on there. There are some rash guards on there.
Dope.
Yeah.
Rash
and
guards.
there are some hats on there.
Are they there?
They should be.
You said that last time.
I know, bruh. And I still have, I think, a day. No, today. They should be on.
You owe me 9 hats, by the way.
You got it.
Check.
So there it is. And I'm not saying to support this podcast, buy our stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm saying go on the website. Check out the stuff on there.
Canadian yarn art. This stuff sells itself.
Yeah.
See, now you're not getting my references.
No.
That's
and I was born in Canada too, so that's kind of off.
But you're not a Tenacious D fan.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey man, all good Canadian yarn art. Wait, we don't sell that.
No, we don't.
Sells itself.
It sells
and
itself.
so does this stuff.
Maybe we should
potentially
sell some Canadian yarn art.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, go on there, check it out. If you like something, get something. Good way to support. Also, Psychological Warfare. What Psychological Warfare is, if you don't know, it is an album with tracks, Jocko tracks. And what he does is, on the tracks, he's talking to you. Each track. And he's talking to you about different stuff. Weaknesses. Different weaknesses.
There you go.
So really, this is what you need. This is the album.
Different stuff doesn't cut it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Even though
Jocko's talking
technically
about
it's
you
true.
about the type of toothpaste that he uses.
Right. No, I didn't
No
say
one cares
thus.
about that.
Well, maybe.
True.
Depends. You know how there's a controversy about fluoride being in the toothpaste. You know, I'm just saying if that's important.
I'm really egging you on today.
I'm just saying.
I apologize, everyone.
You brought it up, bro. Anyway, what it's really for, this album, is in your campaign against weakness.
Yeah.
That's the new phrase. It's not journey anymore. It's campaign against weakness.
Like that.
Andy Goodbread. He gave me that one.
Right
Because
on.
I don't like saying journey that much,
someone
remember?
actually messaged you and said, hey, quit saying journey, say campaign against weakness, which is actually from the podcast, which is legit.
Layers. Big time. Anyway, thanks, Andy, for that one. But that's the one I'm using for right now until like a better one comes up, if that's even possible.
No,
so in your campaign against weakness, every single day, for the rest of your life now, you're in the game right now. It's for the rest of your life.
Yeah, the campaign lasts forever.
Yeah. There's no discharge.
From the war?
Yeah, man.
Dang, layers coming out big time.
Anyway, so if you're trying to wake up, early every day or, 5 days a week, however long, however much, and you got that day where you're supposed to wake up early and you don't want to, you just don't feel like it. That's really the thing. You don't feel like it, So Jocko's there for you with a little spot. Diet stuff, procrastination stuff. Workout stuff, creativity stuff. That's a big one. And I don't listen to the creativity one.
That's because you feel like you're all creative.
No, but here's the thing. I'm like one of those things. You know how let's say you had a pimple or something, a zit. I know I'm going deep, but if you have a zit, some people they're like, I'm gonna pop the zit. Some people they're like, no, leave it alone, let it go away. You see what I'm saying? So I'm the latter when it comes to creativity. I'm like, man, I'm not creative. I'm at a creative block. Don't force it. Don't get Jocko on here telling me pragmatically, by the way, but still
just get
Jocko,
creative to it now. Think of a good idea.
Thankfully, it's a little bit more than that, but that's kind of the philosophy. I'm not saying that's the best way. In fact, I should
manufacture Inspirato. You're missing another good Tenacious D reference that I just made.
But that's kind of the good thing about this is that that's not what it is.
No,
you know how you'll explain, part of it, and this is a total paraphrasing situation, but you said it in a really good way before when you're like, memorize the feeling after your workout or something like that. Good. See, that's not, you're not inspiring me to go work out. You're kind of pragmatically telling me this is how you mentally wage an effective war on that little weakness there. That's what it is. Anyway. Tracks doing this for all kinds of situations. It's called Psychological Warfare. Jocko Willink. That's a good one.
Also, I have some other options now. If you want to kind of support this podcast, you can check out originmain.com for your jiu-jitsu needs. We are now unified fully with Origin. Made in America, like me. I would say like Echo, but Echo is actually made in Canada.
No, I was technically made in America.
Oh, okay, cool.
I was just
made
delivered.
Made in America, like Echo and me.
And delivered. Wait, I was delivered in Canada. Can they get stuff from Origin in Canada?
Yeah. You can
Well,
get
there it is.
worldwide.
Boom. Just like me then.
Okay. So there you go. OriginMaine.com for your jiu-jitsu needs, and check them out. Also, if you want to check us out live, if you want to check out Origin live. Now, what kind of company is telling you, hey, come to our factory and see what we're all about? You know what kind of company? Our company. We're going to be up there in Farmington, Maine, August 23rd. Come on up. It's too late to enter into the Origin camp, the immersion camp. If you haven't signed up for that, you missed it. You'll have to do it next year. But on August 23rd, we're going to be up there. We're going to be cruising. We're going to be hanging out. We're going to be getting after it up at the factory. You can come and see what that's all about. Also, and I'll just put this out. I was kind of hesitating, but listen, we have some supplements coming for you. As soon as I started with Pete, who is my partner at Origin, as soon as we kind of started talking, as soon as it looked like we were going to solidify a deal, we started he's got a little supplement line, which gives the opportunity for me to design the supplements. So a little while back, we had that opportunity, designed them, made them, went on them, legit, and we got the formulas down, and we're going to ramp up production now. So in a little while, you're going to see the Jocko line of supplements coming out.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So Echo's had his little bit coming in.
Mm-hmm.
We're on them.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're good to go. So anyways, what we need to watch out for is the demand. So what we're going to do is we're going to put them up so you can order them. They won't be out until mid-September. Mm-hmm. But if you order them earlier, the better we can support you for supporting us.
Yeah. Kind of like the book situation. Almost.
Yes. Yes. So that's that. Also, Jocko White Tea. If you want to support the podcast and support yourself, and if you want to deadlift in the neighborhood of 8,000 pounds, you can get Jocko White Tea. If you don't want to deadlift 8,000 pounds, that's cool. Drink something else.
Yeah.
Drink something else. That's fine. If you want to support your brain, we got books. If you want to support your kid's brain, get them the brain and their body and their life. Get them Way of the Warrior Kid. I get kids. It's cool now. Kids come up to me and I sign their books. They're all fired up. So they're changing.
Yeah.
You will change. Your kid will get on the path. No kidding.
Yeah. And it's good for the parent too, because you can reference that book in little situations, you know?
It's legit.
Yeah, it's good.
Even my youngest daughter, her friends are reading it. And so they come over and they're like, they're excited. Yeah. So that's cool too. Give it to your kids, whoever, your neighborhood's kids, whatever. Give it to all the kids you know, so they can get stronger and faster and smarter and better, which is a really big thing to give a kid.
Yes. Everything pretty much.
You know what I'm going to give you? I'm going to make you stronger, faster, stronger, and better. Smarter. You're a human being.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing to give someone? Yes, it is. So do it. Also, if you want the first edition of Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual, you got to order it soon. And there's so many questions that I get asked all the time are in this book. They're answered in this book. Food intake.
Yeah.
Workouts. They're in there. A lot of them.
Yeah.
They're in there. Everyone that asks me about all different martial arts, where should I start? It's all in there.
Yeah.
Sleep. What about sleep? It's in there. How do you wake up so early? It's in there. Rest and recovery. It's in there. All this stuff is in there. It's all in there. And there's a whole section of like what I'm thinking about on a daily basis. So check that out.
That's a big one. Well, like what you're thinking.
Yeah, people want to know what I'm thinking about.
That's a big deal.
For some reason, they ask me, like, what are you thinking here? I answer it. That's why I wrote that book.
Yeah. Well, like any situation where it's like you're faced with a decision to do this thing and it's hard, but you know it has to be done or should be done or whatever. And there's so many times where you just, when you shift or someone tells you something, hey, look at it this way. And, you know, like my dad would always say, do it and it'll be done.
Do it and it'll be done.
And it's like, dang, all it took was really thinking a certain way.
BC.
Compared to your next.
BC?
Yeah, BC.
BC says do it and
And
it's
it'll
done.
be done. Yeah, it's true.
You get that book from Amazon, from Barnes & Noble. Whatever little bookstore is around you, go and tell them to get it. Or you can sit around and watch life pass you by. It's up to you. Also, Extreme Ownership. It's still going strong. Why is Extreme Ownership still going strong? Is it because the massive advertising campaign that we put onto the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal? No, actually, we didn't do that. You know why it's going strong? Because of word of mouth. That's what it's going strong for. Because one person gets it, they buy it for this person, that person buys it for someone else, that person buys it for their team. That's why we're still selling that thing like crazy. Why? And why was it going through word of mouth? Because it works. Functionally works. It's not theoretical. It is pragmatic. It's functional. It'll make you a better leader, and it'll make your team better. Period. We've seen this over and over and over again. That's why it's selling a lot. So get yourself and your team so you can implement that, and you can win. Then for your business, if your business needs some leadership assistance or guidance or wants to improve and wants to go from doing well to doing awesome, Echelon Front, that's our leadership consulting. Me, Leif Babin, JP Donnell, Dave Burke will come put your team into full attack mode. You can email info@echelonfront.com. Now, we have the muster coming. This is important. September 14th and 15th in San Diego. I think it's 70, maybe 75% sold out at this time. In fact, the hotel is sold out. So we've got rooms at another hotel. You'll get it when you register. It's a block or two away. So if you want to come, it's going to sell out. So register fast. You can do that at extremeownership.com. While you're waiting for the muster, or while you're waiting to see us up in Maine at the Origin Factory grand opening, where we make stuff in America. While you're waiting for that, if you want to link up with us and maybe just cruise a little bit, you can find us. We're actually on the interwebs. The Twitter, the Instagram, that Facebooky boy. Echo is at Echo Charles, and I am at Jocko Willink. I talked about the Snapchat last time.
Sure.
Didn't get around to it.
Yeah, I mean, there.
I'm going to.
Of course.
It's coming.
Procrastinating.
And plus, I wasn't around my kids, so they have to instruct me.
That's cool. That's good.
I wasn't around.
Humility.
Yeah, or Jade Charles, because
Sure.
maybe Jade Charles could instruct me.
Yeah, he'll
All
probably
right.
charge you for that, though. So you probably stick with the kids.
Yeah, I'll stick with the kids.
Or not, whatever.
And finally, to all the servicemen and women around the world, from our military and from our proud allies, thank you for going forward and protecting our way of life. To the firefighters and the police and to the other law enforcement and to EMTs and first responders, thank you for protecting us here at home. And the rest of you that are out there listening, that are facing challenges of your own, struggling with your own battles, large and small, whatever those battles might be, fight hard. Keep going. And keep getting after it. So until next time, this is Echo and Jocko.